Welcome to History Teller YT, where forgotten civilizations rise again and lost worlds speak through time. Today, you're about to enter one of the most extraordinary journeys in ancient history. The story of a people who didn't conquer with armies, but shaped the world with ships, trade, language, and imagination. This is the untold saga of the Phoenicians, the masters of the sea. For thousands of years, they traveled beyond the horizon, built harbors where no roads existed, connected empires that never even met, and carried ideas across oceans long before the world understood what global exchange truly meant. They gave humanity the alphabet, revolutionized navigation, engineered incredible ships, created the legendary Tyrian purple, founded mighty Carthage, and stood toe-to-toe with Roman battles that changed the course of history forever. From Byblos to Tyre, from Sidon to Carthage, from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic, their influence shaped continents, cultures, and civilizations. In this series, you will explore the birth of Phoenician cities and their rise to maritime power, their mastery of shipbuilding and celestial navigation, the purple dye industry that made kings kneel, the founding of Carthage, the jewel of the West, the Punic Wars, Hannibal's genius, and the tragedy of Carthage, their religion, myths, symbols, rituals, and worldview, their innovations in science, trade, governance, and culture, their legacy that survives today in our alphabets, economies, and identities. This is not just history. This is an adventure across oceans, across time, and across civilizations. By the time you finish this journey, you will understand how a people without an empire changed the world more than many kings, pharaohs, and emperors ever did. So sit back, relax, and prepare for a deep dive into the lost world of the Phoenicians. Let the waves guide you into a story of courage, brilliance, and timeless influence. Welcome to the voyage. Sardinia offered rich metal resources, especially silver and lead, making it a natural target for Phoenician traders. Settlements like Theros, Sulcais, and Nora emerged as key ports. The Nuragic civilization of Sardinia had its own powerful traditions, but Phoenician settlers built cooperative relationships with local leaders, resulting in shared cultural zones rather than violent displacement. The archaeological remains of temples, houses, pottery, and inscriptions from Sardinia reveal a deep level of integration between Phoenician and indigenous communities. Iberia, modern Spain, was perhaps the greatest prize for the Phoenicians. The region's mineral wealth, especially silver from the Rio Tinto mines, was unparalleled. The colony of Gator, modern Cadiz, founded as early as the 9th century BCE, became one of the richest cities in the ancient Mediterranean. From here, Phoenicians traded metals, fish products, salted meats, and agricultural goods. They interacted with Tartessos, a wealthy local kingdom whose metalwork astonished ancient writers. Phoenician influence in Iberia extended to religion, art, metallurgy, and urban planning. The region became a second homeland for many Phoenician families. Malta served as a logistical stop between the Levant and the Western Mediterranean. Settlements on Malta and Gozo helped connect trade routes between North Africa, Sicily, and the Aegean. The islands offered safe harbors and rich fishing grounds. Over time, Phoenician religious and cultural elements became so ingrained in Malta that Punic inscriptions and temples remained influential well into the Roman period. North Africa, particularly the coastal regions of modern Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria, became a crucial frontier for Phoenician settlement. Cities like Utica, Ia, Hippodryas, Sabratha, and Lixus played roles in trade with inland Berber tribes. These settlements served as intermediaries for commodities such as ivory animals, gold, and spices. Cultural fusion between Phoenician settlers and Berber groups produced unique local identities that endured even after Carthage's fall. The Mediterranean colonies formed an intricate network of open channels, trade links, and shared cultural spaces. They were strategically positioned near river mouths, islands, or sheltered harbors, locations ideal for international trade. Their success was not due to military strength, but to adaptability, diplomacy, and the Phoenician instinct for opportunity. Through these colonies, the Phoenicians extended their influence far beyond the Levant, leaving cultural footprints across 3 continents. No Phoenician colony changed the course of history as profoundly as Carthage, the daughter city of Tyre that rose to become one of the greatest powers of the ancient Mediterranean. Founded around 814 BCE, according to classical tradition by Queen Dido, Elissa, Carthage began as a modest settlement on a naturally defensible peninsula in North Africa. Over time, it evolved into a sprawling metropolis, a naval powerhouse, and the center of a Western Phoenician identity known as Punic culture. Carthage was not merely a colony. It was a rebirth, a transformation of Phoenician civilization into something larger, stronger, and destined for greatness. The city's location was chosen with extraordinary strategic foresight. The peninsula provided a deep, sheltered harbor, fertile hinterlands for agriculture, and easy access to Mediterranean sea routes connecting Sicily, Sardinia, Iberia, and the Levant. Its position allowed Carthage to control maritime traffic between the eastern and western Mediterranean, giving it economic leverage unmatched by any other Phoenician city. As Tyre and Sidon faced increasing pressure from Assyrian and Babylonian empires, Carthage became the refuge of merchants, sailors, craftsmen, and religious leaders who sought stability and opportunity. This influx transformed the small settlement into a flourishing urban center. Carthage quickly developed its own institutions. Its government featured elected magistrates, a powerful senate of elite families, and tribunals that balanced aristocratic and political factions. Unlike the monarchies of the Levant, Carthage practiced a republican system that impressed even Greek observers. Aristotle famously praised Carthage's political structure as one of the best governed societies in the ancient world. This stability allowed the city to expand its influence without the internal conflicts that weakened many rival powers. Economically, Carthage became the beating heart of Punic civilization. Its industries included shipbuilding, agriculture, pottery, textiles, metalwork, and trade. Carthaginian farmers perfected advanced agricultural techniques, including irrigation, crop rotation, and grafting. The fertile plains surrounding the city produced olives, grains, fruits, and wine. Carthage became known not only as a maritime giant, but also as the agricultural powerhouse of North Africa. What truly set Carthage apart was its navy. The Carthaginians inherited Phoenician maritime expertise and elevated it to new heights. Their harbors included a massive circular military port capable of housing hundreds of warships. Each ship had its own shed, and the design allowed for rapid mobilization. Carthaginian warships, especially their triremes and quinquiremes, were some of the most advanced naval vessels of their era. This naval strength enabled Carthage to project power across the western Mediterranean, establishing dominance over Sicily, Sardinia, the Balearic Islands, and parts of Iberia. Carthaginian culture remained deeply rooted in Phoenician heritage, but it developed unique qualities. The gods Baal, Hammon, and Tanit held central importance, and Carthaginian religious festivals blended traditional Levantine rites with local African practices. Punic art, language, architecture, and social customs reflected a blend of old and new identities. creating a rich cultural mosaic that was distinct from both Eastern Phoenicia and neighboring Berber societies. Carthage's rise inevitably brought it into conflict with Greek city-states and, eventually, Rome. These tensions led to the Punic Wars, some of the most dramatic military confrontations of the ancient world. Although Carthage ultimately fell to Rome in 146 BCE, its legacy endured. Carthage was rebuilt by the Romans and later became one of the most prosperous cities in the empire. Punic culture influenced language, religion, agriculture, and commerce across North Africa for centuries. Carthage stands as the most powerful testament to the brilliance and adaptability of Phoenician civilization. It was a new phoenix rising from the ashes of Eastern constraints, bold, ambitious, innovative, and capable of shaping the destiny of the Mediterranean. Phoenician society, though shaped by maritime pursuits and global trade, was anchored in strong family values, stable community structures, and an intricate social hierarchy. These foundational elements ensured that despite constant travel, political pressure, and cultural exchange, the Phoenician identity remained unified across centuries and continents. Understanding their social structure reveals how everyday life supported and was supported by their achievements in commerce, navigation, religion, and politics. At the heart of Phoenician society was the extended family, which formed the fundamental unit of social life. Families often included parents, children, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and sometimes even business partners who worked closely with the household. This structure provided security and continuity, especially in cities where men frequently left for long voyages. The family maintained its economic stability through shared property, joint business ventures, and inheritance customs designed to preserve wealth across generations. Sons were typically trained in their father's trade, whether it was shipbuilding, metalworking, glassmaking, farming, or commerce, ensuring the transmission of skills that upheld economic continuity. Women held a respected position within the household and community, while male relatives often dominated political and commercial affairs. Women were essential managers of domestic life, property, and religious rituals. Historical inscriptions suggest that Phoenician women could own land, conduct business, and act as priestesses in certain religious communities. In colonies such as Carthage, women played especially prominent roles, participating in public ceremonies and maintaining influential positions in family networks. Their participation in economic activities varied from city to city, but evidence shows that they were far from passive. Many households depended on the organizational abilities of women while men were away at sea. Social hierarchy in Phoenicia was flexible yet clearly structured. At the top were elite families, often those with long histories of maritime success, land ownership, or political leadership. These families controlled large estates, sponsored ships, funded temple activities, and influenced political decisions. Below them were skilled artisans, merchants, and craftsmen who formed the backbone of Phoenician society. Their skills, passed down through generations, were essential to the economy's success. Craftsmen in glassmaking, metalwork, dye production, and carpentry earned considerable respect and often grew wealthy through trade. Sailors and fishermen formed another important social group. Their work was strenuous and dangerous, but was also highly valued, as the entire economy depended on their ability to navigate and transport goods. Harbor laborers, ship repairers, rope weavers, and port administrators contributed to the smooth functioning of daily commerce. Despite the risks they faced, sailors were treated with admiration, and many religious rituals centered around their safety. Farmers and workers in rural areas contributed significantly to the Phoenician way of life. Although the homeland lacked vast agricultural plains, farming communities in valleys and coastal areas produced olives, grapes, figs, grains, and vegetables. These goods supported local economies and supplemented imported foods. In colonies like Carthage, agriculture played an even greater role, allowing farmers to attain wealth and influence. Foreign residents, travelers, and traders were common in Phoenician cities due to the constant flow of international commerce. While they did not possess the same rights as citizens, they were often integrated into local communities through business partnerships, marriages, and shared religious practices. This cosmopolitan environment fostered tolerance, adaptability, and a cultural openness that defined Phoenician civilization. Community life centered around temples, harbor districts, marketplaces, and family courtyards. Festivals brought people together to honor the gods, celebrate maritime successes, and mark seasonal transitions. Children were educated informally, learning languages, mathematics, and trade skills at home or in workshop environments. Overall, Phoenician society was stable, sophisticated, and tightly knit, balancing tradition with economic ambition. Its cohesion allowed a small group of coastal cities to create a far-reaching civilization whose influence endured across continents and centuries. Daily life for the Phoenicians was grounded in routines shaped by geography, economic activity, and cultural tradition. Their homes, clothing, food, and urban architecture reflected a civilization that valued practicality, artistry, and comfort without excess. While they were famous for their maritime achievements, their cities and domestic lives were equally complex, revealing how ordinary people lived, worked, and interacted in one of the most dynamic cultures of the ancient world. Phoenician architecture was adapted to coastal environments. Houses were typically built from stone, mud brick, or timber, depending on regional resources. In crowded cities like Tyre and Sidon, homes were multi-storied, with narrow streets and shared walls to maximize limited space. Rooftops served as essential living areas where families dried food, wove textiles, held gatherings, and enjoyed cooler evening air. Windows were often small to keep heat out, and interior courtyards provided light and ventilation. Wealthier homes featured columns, painted frescoes, carved wooden furnishings, and imported pottery. Temples stood as the most elaborate structures, often built on elevated locations overlooking harbors. Their architecture combined local styles with influences from Egypt and Mesopotamia. Carthaginian temples, for instance, incorporated both triangular pediments and North African artistic motifs. Phoenician builders were also admired for their engineering, crafting seawalls, docks, and warehouses that formed the backbone of urban infrastructure. Clothing in Phoenician society was both practical and expressive of status. Men and women wore tunics made of linen or wool, often dyed in bright colors. The wealthiest individuals adorned themselves with garments trimmed in Tyrian purple, a display of both style and status. Jewelry made from gold, silver, bronze, and glass beads was common and often finely crafted. Rings, bracelets, earrings, and amulets were worn by both genders. Phoenician craftsmen excelled at making intricate jewelry, which became a major export item as well. For ordinary workers, artisans, farmers, sailors, clothing was sturdy and functional. Sailors wore short, durable garments suitable for maritime labor, while craftsmen and fishermen dressed lightly due to the coastal climate. Women frequently wore long dresses with ornamented borders and sometimes veils or headscarves depending on region. Children usually wore simple tunics until adolescence, when they adopted adult attire. The Phoenician diet reflected both local agriculture and international trade. Staples included bread made from barley or wheat, olives, figs, dates, pomegranates, fish, and seafood. Cities along the coast relied heavily on fishing, producing dried and salted fish that were exported across the Mediterranean. Meat, especially lamb and goat, was eaten on special occasions or religious festivals. Vegetables like onions, garlic, lentils, cucumbers, and leafy greens were common. Wine, often stored in large amphorae, was consumed widely, and Phoenician vineyards were maintained both in the homeland and in colonies such as Carthage and Iberia. Because of their extensive trade networks, Phoenicians enjoyed foods unavailable to many other ancient societies. Spices from Arabia, honey from Cyprus, grains from Egypt, and exotic fruits from North Africa appeared regularly in Phoenician markets. Wealthier households often had access to imported delicacies, such as dates from Mesopotamia, sesame oil, nuts, and exotic fish. Craftsmanship also defined domestic life. Everyday objects, from cooking pots to lamps, combs, storage jars, and toys, were made with skill and care. Glass vessels were particularly prized for storing oils, perfumes, and cosmetics. Carpentry, metal tools, and woven fabrics demonstrated a quality of workmanship that made even mundane objects aesthetically pleasing. Urban life revolved around bustling markets, where traders sold goods from local farms, foreign merchants displayed exotic items, and artisans showcased their craft. These marketplaces were loud, colorful, and diverse, reflecting the cosmopolitan character of Phoenician cities. Public fountains, wells, and communal ovens also played important roles in daily routines. In essence, Phoenician everyday life was a blend of comfort, creativity, and cultural richness. Their homes and clothing reflected their identity as a coastal people, while their diet and domestic tools showcased a society deeply connected to the broader Mediterranean world through trade and shared experience. Education and social values were central to the endurance of Phoenician civilization. Although they are often remembered for their trade networks and navy, the Phoenicians also developed a cultural environment that prized learning, skill, adaptability, and community responsibility. Childhood, work, and education all reflected a pragmatic worldview based on continuity, passing knowledge from one generation to the next to ensure survival and prosperity in a demanding maritime world. Education in Phoenician society was practical, hands-on, and integrated into daily life. Unlike societies that relied heavily on formalized schooling or scribal institutions, the Phoenicians taught their children through apprenticeships, observation, and family instruction. Boys and girls learned essential skills early in life. Boys expected to become merchants, sailors, craftsmen, or farmers learned mathematics, weights and measures, basic literacy, and trade languages such as Egyptian, Greek, or Aramaic. They accompanied older relatives on business trips, learned navigation techniques, practiced carpentry, or observed metalworking. Girls learned domestic management, weaving, textile production, food preparation, and participation in religious rituals. In wealthier families, girls might receive more advanced instruction, reading, writing, and religious knowledge, especially if the family had priestly connections. Although gender roles were present, Phoenician society respected the contributions of both men and women, relying on cooperation rather than strict segregation. Children grew up in environments filled with cultural exchange. Markets exposed them to foreign languages. Harbors showed them ships from distant lands. Temples taught them rituals that reinforced identity and community belonging. This eclectic upbringing prepared them to thrive in a world where flexibility and cultural sensitivity were essential strengths. Work life in Phoenician society was shaped by specialization. Because of the civilization's diverse economic activities, people could pursue a wide range of professions. Merchants formed the elite of work life, commanding fleets, negotiating contracts, and managing warehouses. Artisans, carpenters, potters, metalworkers, dyers, and glassmakers were highly valued, often passing their skills down within guild-like family networks. Sailors were essential for trade and warfare. Their training involved physical endurance, navigation, and teamwork. Priests and religious officials maintained spiritual order, while farmers cultivated the limited arable land or worked in colonial estates. Work was not just economic, it was cultural. Every profession contributed to collective identity. Even fishermen, often overlooked in historical records, were central figures in coastal communities, bringing daily sustenance and participating in rituals that honored the sea. Moreover, Phoenician social values emphasized adaptability, cooperation, skill, and respect for tradition. They valued endurance, as seafaring demanded physical and psychological strength. They valued diplomacy, as trade required negotiation and sensitivity to foreign customs. They valued craftsmanship, as their reputation depended on producing goods admired around the world. They valued religious continuity, as rituals offered protection for voyages and prosperity for communities. Children learned these values early. Festivals taught them respect for the gods. Work alongside adults taught them discipline. Market life taught them negotiation and curiosity. Storytelling about voyages, gods, heroes, and ancestors instilled pride and identity. Ultimately, the Phoenicians raised generations capable of sustaining a civilization that thrived without an empire, conquered not by armies but by skill, and shaped history through knowledge, tradition, and cultural resilience. Their social fabric produced individuals who could navigate storms, negotiate across cultures, craft beauty from raw materials, and carry the legacy of a people across centuries. Phoenician art was one of the most remarkable expressions of cultural fusion in the ancient world. Unlike societies that developed isolated artistic styles rooted in rigid tradition, the Phoenicians embraced a dynamic form of creativity shaped by their constant interactions with foreign cultures. Their position as master traders exposed them to Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Aegean, Anatolian, Cypriot, and North African artistic traditions. Instead of simply copying what they encountered, Phoenician artists synthesized these influences into unique creations that resonated across the Mediterranean. This blending of styles became a hallmark of Phoenician identity, reflecting the cosmopolitan nature of their civilization. Phoenician cities were centers of artistic production, Sidon with its ivory workshops, Tyre with textile and purple dye artisans, Byblos with its renowned wood carving, and Carthage with its Punic stonework and religious art. Each city contributed distinct textures to a broader artistic landscape. However, underlying these differences was a shared aesthetic language characterized by elegance, detail, symbolism, and adaptability. Whether crafting jewelry, pottery, sculptures, metal bowls, glass vessels, or temple decorations, Phoenician artisans embedded a mixture of innovation and inherited tradition into their work. Common artistic motifs included lotus flowers, winged sphinxes, palm trees, rosettes, scarabs, lions, bulls, and hybrid creatures drawn from the myths of multiple civilizations. Egyptian influence appeared frequently in amulets, figurines, and decorative inlays. Mesopotamian motifs influenced seals, metalwork, and carvings that depicted divine beings or protective spirits. Aegean elements emerged in pottery styles and geometric patterns. rather than diluting their identity. This eclectic mixture strengthened it, making Phoenician art instantly recognizable for its multicultural expressiveness. One of the most compelling aspects of Phoenician artistic culture was its emphasis on portability. Because the Phoenicians were travelers, many of their creations were designed to be transported easily. Small ivory plaques, glass beads, metal bowls, engraved seals, amulets, and jewelry could be carried in ships and traded across vast distances. These objects served not only as commercial products, but also as tokens of connection between far-flung communities. A Phoenician necklace found in a Sardinian tomb or a carved ivory discovered in a Mesopotamian palace symbolized the movement of ideas, stories, and identities across the Mediterranean. Phoenician sculpture often depicted deities, animals, and mythical figures, carved in limestone or cast in bronze. Temples featured elaborate decorative friezes and cult statues made with a combination of local materials and imported elements. Even their everyday tools, from oil lamps to pottery containers, were crafted with attention to form and proportion. They transformed functional objects into aesthetic pieces, blurring the line between utility and beauty. Their glassmaking, perhaps the most famous of their artistic achievements, revolutionized ancient craftsmanship. Using sand, natron, and expertise passed down through generations, Phoenician artisans produced colorful beads, translucent vessels, and decorative pieces that dazzled ancient buyers. The diversity of shapes, from tiny amphora-shaped perfume bottles to spiraled beads and molded figurines, demonstrated their artistic ingenuity. Their development of early glass-blowing techniques paved the way for later Roman innovations. Ultimately, Phoenician art reflected the personality of a people who embraced the world around them without losing themselves. Their creativity was neither rigid nor derivative. It was adaptive, open-minded, and deeply skilled. Through their art, they communicated a message of connection between cultures, lands, and generations. The Phoenicians used their artistic talents not only to create beauty, but to shape the shared visual vocabulary of the ancient Mediterranean, influencing the artistic traditions of cultures long after their political power had faded. Although the Phoenicians did not leave behind philosophical treatises or monumental inscriptions like the Greeks, Egyptians, or Mesopotamians, they developed an intellectual culture grounded in practicality, observation, and innovation. Their civilization thrived not because of written doctrines, but because of accumulated knowledge. Knowledge of winds, stars, metallurgy, shipbuilding, crafts, mathematics, diplomacy, and languages. This emphasis on applied science allowed them to excel in a wide array of fields that required precision and intelligence. Navigation was the pinnacle of Phoenician intellectual achievement. Their mastery of the Mediterranean was not accidental. It resulted from centuries of accumulated knowledge passed down orally and through maritime apprenticeship. Phoenician sailors studied star patterns, especially Polaris, and recognized seasonal wind cycles. They learned how to read the shape of waves, the behavior of birds, the color of coastal waters, and the smell of the air before storms. Their navigational expertise allowed them to embark on journeys that other civilizations considered impossible, such as voyages to the Atlantic and, possibly, the circumnavigation of Africa. This knowledge was not simply technical. It reflected a deep understanding of nature and an ability to interpret environmental clues with exceptional accuracy. Mathematics played a crucial role in their commercial and navigational success. Merchants needed arithmetic skills to calculate quantities, weights, and exchange rates. Shipbuilders used geometric knowledge to design hulls proportional to the needs of cargo, speed, and stability. Phoenician architects employed advanced measurements in temple and harbor construction. Their accounting practices were sophisticated, relying on written records, standardized weights, and contractual documentation. Linguistic intelligence was another hallmark of Phoenician culture. As international traders, they learned multiple languages: Egyptian, Greek, Aramaic, Cypriot dialects, Iberian languages, and Berber tongues. This multilingualism facilitated diplomatic negotiations, trade agreements, and cultural exchange. Their invention and refinement of the alphabet further demonstrated their linguistic adaptability and innovative spirit. Craftsmanship was also an intellectual pursuit. Phoenician artisans possessed technical knowledge that required years of training. Glassmakers understood chemical reactions, heating techniques, and cooling processes. Metalworkers mastered smelting, alloying, casting, and engraving. Textile dyers learned the complex chemistry of extracting and preserving purple dye from murex snails. Carpenters and shipwrights understood wood grain, shaping techniques, resin applications, and waterproofing methods. These crafts required intellectual rigor equal to that of scribal traditions in other cultures. The Phoenicians were also skilled diplomats. Their survival depended on negotiating with empires far stronger than themselves. They developed a keen understanding of political psychology, when to resist, when to submit, when to form alliances, and how to maintain autonomy under tributary obligations. Their political flexibility was a kind of intellectual strategy that allowed small city-states to survive the pressures of Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece. Religious knowledge formed another intellectual domain. Priests studied ceremonial traditions, astronomical observations, and ritual calendars. They interpreted omens, maintained temple archives, and managed the spiritual well-being of communities. Religion for the Phoenicians was deeply tied to practical concerns: safety at sea, agricultural fertility, and communal harmony, creating a pragmatic spirituality rooted in environmental awareness. Though the Phoenicians were not philosophers in the classical Greek sense, their intellectual achievements were no less significant. Their legacy lives on in technologies, navigational principles, linguistic innovations, and commercial practices that shaped the ancient world. Their practical wisdom, born of necessity, curiosity, and survival, remains a testament to a civilization whose intelligence was expressed not through monuments of stone, but through mastery of the natural and economic world. Phoenician culture was rich with symbols, myths, and spiritual concepts that expressed their worldview and shaped their identity across centuries. Although much of their mythology has been lost due to the fragmentary nature of their written records, surviving inscriptions, Greek accounts, and archaeological findings allow us to reconstruct aspects of their spiritual imagination. Their myths were not purely fantastical. They served practical, moral, and communal functions. They explained natural forces, legitimized political authority, and reinforced cultural unity across far-flung colonies. One of the most enduring symbols of Phoenician identity was the phoenix, the mythical bird that died in flames and was reborn from its own ashes. Although the symbol was not exclusive to the Phoenicians, the Greeks and later cultures associated it strongly with them, likely due to the resilience and renewal embodied in their civilization. The phoenix perfectly captured the spirit of a people who rebuilt after invasions, founded distant colonies when pressured at home, and created Carthage, a new superpower, after Eastern Phoenicia faced upheaval. The symbolism of death and rebirth became a poetic reflection of Phoenician adaptability and endurance. Their mythology featured gods deeply connected to nature, fertility, navigation, and protection. Melkart, the patron god of Tyre, represented strength, kingship, and renewal. The annual festival celebrating his resurrection symbolized the cycles of the natural world: death, rebirth, and the continuity of life. Astarte, the goddess of love, war, and fertility, embodied both creation and destruction, reflecting the dual nature of the sea. Eshmun, the god of healing, symbolized restoration and protection, offering hope to sailors and families alike. The Phoenicians also used sacred symbols extensively. The Tanit symbol, known from Punic Carthage, featured a triangle topped with a circle and flanked by outstretched arms. It represented divine femininity, protection, and cosmic harmony. This symbol appeared on steels, jewelry, pottery, and religious artifacts across North Africa and Iberia. The palm tree, symbolizing life and prosperity, was frequently carved on ivories and temple decorations. The rosette, a stylized flower, signified beauty, fertility, and cosmic order. Another important symbol was the ship itself, depicted in carvings, seals, and pottery. For the Phoenicians, ships represented more than tools of trade. They symbolized destiny, survival, exploration, and connection between worlds. Sailors prayed to divine powers before embarking on voyages, believing that spiritual blessings guarded the hull and sails. This belief reinforced the intimate connection between religious life and seafaring identity. Phoenician mythology also included heroic stories that mirrored their way of life. Legends of explorers, founders, and divine navigators emerged across colonies. The story of Dido, Elissa, who founded Carthage after escaping Tyre, became one of the most influential myths in classical literature. Her tale, preserved through Greek and Roman writers, reflected themes of leadership, exile, sacrifice, and the creation of new beginnings, core aspects of Phoenician colonial identity. Myths also influenced political legitimacy. Kings often linked themselves to divine figures or mythological heroes to reinforce their authority. Temples displayed inscriptions claiming divine favor, linking civic prosperity to adherence to sacred traditions. Religious festivals brought communities together, celebrating myths through rituals, songs, dances, and communal feasts. Because the Phoenicians traveled widely, their mythology evolved as it spread. In colonies, local interpretations blended with indigenous beliefs. Carthage developed its own religious identity, centered heavily on Tanit and Balhaman. Iberian Phoenicians adopted local symbols while retaining Levantine traditions. This flexibility allowed Phoenician mythology to thrive in new environments without losing its core meaning. The spiritual language of the Phoenicians reflected who they were, a people shaped by the sea, strengthened by trade, and united by shared symbols that transcended thousands of miles. Their mythology captured the essence of their world, mysterious yet practical, vast yet deeply connected, fragile yet perpetually renewing like the phoenix that symbolized their enduring legacy. For centuries, the Phoenicians stood at the crossroads of the ancient world, linking the civilizations of the Near East with the Mediterranean through commerce, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. To understand Phoenician history fully, one must explore their relationships with the great empires that surrounded them: Egypt, Mesopotamia, Assyria, Babylon, and Persia. These interactions shaped the trajectory of Phoenician development, influencing their political decisions, economic strategies, artistic traditions, and even religious practices. Despite being a collection of small city-states with limited military strength, the Phoenicians managed to survive and flourish in the shadow of powerful empires by carefully navigating complex geopolitical landscapes. Their earliest and most enduring partner was Egypt, a civilization that valued the Phoenicians for their maritime expertise and access to valuable resources. As early as the 3rd millennium BCE, Byblos became Egypt's primary gateway to the Levant. Egyptian traders relied on the Phoenicians for cedar wood, essential for shipbuilding, funerary architecture, and sacred rituals. Hieroglyphic inscriptions discuss journeys to Cabian, Byblos, emphasizing gifts of timber, oils, and luxury goods. In return, the Phoenicians imported Egyptian gold, papyrus, linen, faience beads, and religious iconography. This exchange created an enduring cultural connection. Phoenician art adopted Egyptian motifs, and Egyptian scarabs became popular amulets in Phoenician cities. Despite occasional tensions, the relationship remained largely peaceful and mutually beneficial. Relations with Mesopotamia were more complex. The cultures of Sumer, Akkad, and later Assyria and Babylon influenced Phoenician religion, writing, and political culture. Many aspects of Phoenician mythology, storm gods, fertility goddesses, healing deities, found parallels in Mesopotamian traditions. The Phoenician script itself drew inspiration from earlier Canaanite and Proto-Sinaitic characters, which were influenced by older pictographic systems of the Near East. Phoenician merchants traded extensively with Mesopotamian cities, transporting metals, timber, glass, and textiles along caravan routes that connected the Fertile Crescent with the Mediterranean coast. However, the rise of the Assyrian Empire dramatically altered the balance of power. Beginning in the 9th century BCE, Assyrian kings sought to dominate the Levant in order to secure tribute and control trade routes. Phoenician cities were forced into tributary relations, paying taxes in silver, gold, purple-dyed textiles, and naval assistance. Although subjugation limited their political independence, the Assyrians recognized the value of Phoenician commerce and ensured their cities remained stable. Tyre and Sidon remained prosperous, even while under foreign oversight. Phoenician craftsmen were highly sought after in Assyrian palaces, where their ivory carvings decorated thrones, walls, and furniture. The fall of Assyria brought the Neo-Babylonian Empire to power. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon sought to impose even stricter control over the Levant. The 13-year siege of Tyre became one of the most dramatic episodes in Phoenician history. While Babylon eventually claimed victory, Tyre's island fortress remained strong enough to avoid total destruction. This period was challenging, but the Phoenicians endured, continuing their trade networks with minimal disruption. The arrival of the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great transformed Phoenician fortunes once again. The Persians, unlike the Assyrians and Babylonians, favored a cooperative approach. Recognizing the Phoenicians' naval superiority, the Persians granted them autonomy in exchange for fleet service. Phoenician ships became instrumental in Persian campaigns in the Aegean and Egypt. Under Persian rule, Phoenician cities experienced a renaissance. Trade expanded, industries flourished, and colonies strengthened their ties to the homeland. Cities like Sidon and Tyre grew wealthy as intermediaries between the Persian Empire and Mediterranean markets. These shifting relationships demonstrate the Phoenicians' extraordinary adaptability. Unlike many civilizations, they did not seek to challenge the great Eastern empires militarily. Instead, they crafted a survival strategy based on diplomacy, tribute, and strategic alignment. They recognized that preserving their economic networks was more important than asserting political dominance. Through this pragmatic approach, the Phoenicians maintained cultural continuity and economic prosperity even under foreign rule, proving that resilience and flexibility could withstand the pressures of empire. The relationship between the Phoenicians and the Greeks is one of the most fascinating narratives of ancient history. These two maritime civilizations often competed fiercely for trade routes, influence, and strategic territories. Yet they also interacted through exchange, imitation, and mutual inspiration. Their encounters shaped art, religion, technology, and political thought across the Mediterranean. While the Greeks ultimately overshadowed the Phoenicians in historical memory, Greek civilization itself was deeply influenced by Phoenician achievements. One of the earliest and most important interactions occurred through the transmission of the alphabet. Greek traders and settlers came into contact with Phoenician merchants around the 9th or 8th century BCE. Recognizing the simplicity and power of the Phoenician writing system, they adapted it, adding vowels to suit their linguistic needs. This transformation created the first true phonetic alphabet, which later evolved into Latin and other scripts used across Europe today. Greek writers openly acknowledged their debt to the Phoenicians. Herodotus, for example, credited the Phoenicia grammata, the Phoenician letters, as the foundation of Greek literacy. Trade between Greeks and Phoenicians was extensive and often mutually beneficial. Greek pottery, olive oil, and wine found markets in Phoenician cities, while Phoenician purple dye, glassware, ivory carvings, metalwork, and luxury textiles were prized in Greek households. Phoenician traders imported Greek ceramics by the thousands, using them both as practical containers and luxury goods. Archaeological evidence of Phoenician pottery and metal objects has been discovered throughout the Aegean, while Greek pottery is widespread in Levantine coastal cities. Despite this exchange, competition intensified as Greek colonization expanded westward into Sicily, southern Italy, and the Aegean Islands, territories where Phoenician presence was already established. Conflicts erupted as both cultures sought control of trade hubs and strategic locations. Sicily, in particular, became a zone of prolonged rivalry. Greek colonies such as Syracuse vied for dominance over Phoenician settlements like Motia and Panormus. These tensions sometimes escalated into military confrontations, especially during the Greek Punic Wars that preceded Carthage's rise. However, rivalry did not prevent cultural borrowing. The Greeks admired Phoenician craftsmanship and adopted numerous artistic motifs from Levantine workshops. Decorative patterns such as rosettes, palm trees, lotus flowers, and sphinxes entered Greek pottery and sculpture through Phoenician influence. Greek religion also absorbed elements of Phoenician mythology. For instance, Melkart of Tyre became associated with Heracles, while Astarte influenced the Greek conception of Aphrodite in Cyprus and other regions. In intellectual spheres, Greeks often portrayed Phoenicians as bold explorers and cunning merchants. Greek stories of faraway lands, such as the mythical journeys of Odysseus, may have been inspired by Phoenician tales of Atlantic voyages. Homer mentions the Phoenicians repeatedly, portraying them as both skilled traders and mysterious seafarers capable of reaching the edges of the world. As Carthage grew into a dominant Phoenician power in the western Mediterranean, Greek-Phoenician interactions intensified. The Greeks feared Carthaginian influence and formed alliances to counter it. Famous battles such as Himera and Ecnomus illustrate the scale of this rivalry. Yet even during these conflicts, cultural exchange persisted. Greek mercenaries fought for Carthage, Greek artisans produced works for Punic elites, and Phoenician merchants continued to trade in Greek markets. Ultimately, the relationship between Greeks and Phoenicians was neither purely antagonistic nor purely cooperative. It was a dynamic blend of competition and exchange, each side pushing the other to innovate, expand, and refine its identity. Through this complex interaction, Both civilizations contributed to the cultural richness of the Mediterranean world, shaping the foundations of Western history. The confrontation between Rome and Carthage was one of the most influential struggles of ancient history, an epic contest that determined the future balance of power in the Mediterranean. While Rome would ultimately emerge victorious, the legacy of Carthage and the Punic world remained profound. This conflict was not simply a clash of armies. It was a battle between two completely different civilizations, one rooted in land, law, and military discipline, the other born of the sea, commerce, and maritime innovation. The Phoenician presence in the Western Mediterranean had been strong for centuries before Rome became a major power. Carthage, as a leading Punic city, controlled territories across North Africa, Sardinia, Corsica, Sicily, Iberia, and the Balearic Islands. It maintained a powerful navy, a wealthy economy, and sophisticated political institutions. Rome, however, viewed Carthage as a growing threat to its ambitions in Italy and the Western Mediterranean. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE, erupted over competition for control of Sicily. This conflict marked Rome's transformation into a naval power. Despite lacking maritime experience, Rome quickly constructed fleets modeled after captured Phoenician ships, especially the quinquereme, a larger version of the trireme. Carthage initially held the advantage, but Rome adapted rapidly, developing new naval tactics such as the corvus, a boarding device that allowed Roman soldiers to turn sea battles into infantry engagements. After 2 decades of fighting, Rome emerged victorious, forcing Carthage to surrender naval territories and pay heavy reparations. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BCE, was the most dramatic and defining phase of the conflict. Carthage's greatest general, Hannibal Barca, led an extraordinary campaign that brought Rome to the brink of destruction. Hannibal's journey across the Alps, accompanied by war elephants, became legendary. His victories at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae, where he inflicted one of the worst defeats in Roman history, demonstrated tactical brilliance unmatched in the ancient world. For years, Hannibal ravaged Italy, seeking to break Rome's alliances and force surrender. Yet Rome refused to fall. Through sheer resilience and strategic patience, it shifted the war to Iberia and North Africa. The Roman general Scipio Africanus eventually defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama, marking the end of Carthage's military dominance. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BCE, sealed Carthage's fate. Despite having lived peacefully for decades, the city remained a symbol of fear and rivalry in the Roman imagination. Roman statesmen, most famously Cato the Elder, repeatedly insisted Carthage must be destroyed. Rome eventually declared war, besieged the city, and after 3 brutal years, breached its defenses. Carthage was burned to the ground, its population enslaved or killed, and its lands declared Roman territory. Yet even in defeat, the legacy of Carthage endured. Rome rebuilt the city a century later, transforming it into one of the wealthiest and most culturally vibrant cities of the Roman Empire. Punic language and traditions survived for centuries, blending into North African culture. Carthaginian agricultural knowledge, particularly in irrigation, crop rotation, and farming techniques, influenced Roman agricultural practices. The memory of Hannibal inspired generations of military thinkers, and the story of Carthage became a symbol of resistance, resilience, and tragic greatness. The struggle between Rome and Carthage ultimately marked the end of Phoenician political independence, but it did not mark the end of Phoenician civilization. Their language, religion, art, and economic practices continued to shape the Mediterranean world. In many ways, Rome inherited the maritime world that the Phoenicians built and carried forward many aspects of Phoenician innovation: ships, markets, trade systems, and agricultural techniques. The final contest between Rome and the Phoenicians was more than a war. It was a turning point in the history of the Mediterranean. It signaled the end of one world and the beginning of another. Yet the shadow of Phoenician brilliance continued to stretch across centuries, influencing the very empire that conquered them. The story of Phoenician decline is not a sudden catastrophe, but a long, complex interaction between a trading civilization and the powerful empires that surrounded it. Unlike societies that fell due to internal collapse or abrupt invasions, the Phoenicians experienced a gradual erosion of autonomy. They were squeezed, not crushed, by the great powers of the ancient world. For centuries, they managed to preserve their identity, economic networks, and cultural heritage, even as political control slipped from their hands. The decline of Phoenician independence must be understood as a slow, multi-stage process shaped by external forces and the very nature of their decentralized political structure. The first significant pressure came from the Assyrian Empire, whose military machine dominated the Near East from the 9th to the 7th century BCE. The Assyrians sought tribute from every wealthy region, and the Phoenician cities, with their thriving trade, luxury goods, and naval power, were obvious targets. Unlike many conquered regions, the Phoenicians rarely faced direct destruction. The Assyrians understood that the value of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos lay in their continued prosperity. Instead, Assyria imposed heavy tributes in silver, gold, and purple textiles. Over time, these tributes forced Phoenician cities to divert wealth toward imperial demands, weakening their economic independence. The Assyrians also interfered in local politics, installing loyal rulers and suppressing rebellions. While the Phoenicians survived, their freedom became increasingly limited. When the Assyrians fell, the Neo-Babylonian Empire emerged as the next dominant force. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon sought to consolidate control over the eastern Mediterranean. Tyre, known for its proud resistance, became a major target. The Babylonian siege of Tyre, lasting an astonishing 13 years, drained the city's resources and morale. Although Babylon eventually claimed victory, Tyre's island fortress allowed it to negotiate relatively favorable terms. Still, the siege marked the beginning of a slow decline in Tyrian power and influence. Other cities, such as Sidon, were subdued more quickly. Babylonian rule imposed new political restrictions and economic burdens, further diminishing Phoenician autonomy. The arrival of the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great brought a temporary resurgence of Phoenician prosperity. Unlike the Assyrians and Babylonians, the Persians adopted a pragmatic approach. They relied on the Phoenicians for naval power, granting their cities considerable freedom in exchange for military assistance. For nearly 2 centuries, Phoenician cities flourished economically under Persian rule. Sidon, especially, experienced a golden age of wealth, art, and international influence. However, this prosperity came at the cost of political dependence. The Phoenicians were valuable allies, but they were no longer free to make unilateral decisions, especially in matters of war and diplomacy. The next great turning point came with the conquest of Alexander the Great. As Alexander swept through the Persian Empire, he demanded submission from Phoenician cities. Sidon surrendered peacefully, but Tyre resisted, leading to the famous siege of 332 BC. Alexander constructed a massive causeway to reach Tyre's island fortress, ultimately breaching its defenses after months of fighting. The fall of Tyre symbolized the end of Phoenician political independence in the Levant. Although Phoenician culture survived, their homeland was absorbed into the Hellenistic world. Yet decline in the east was balanced by rising strength in the west. Carthage, the greatest Phoenician colony, had become a major power. For centuries, Carthage carried the torch of Phoenician civilization, expanding influence across North Africa, Iberia, Sicily, Sardinia, and beyond. However, Carthage's rise brought it into conflict with the one empire that would prove unstoppable: Rome. The Punic Wars marked the final stage of Phoenician political decline. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BC, which ended with the total destruction of Carthage, was the final blow. After Carthage's fall, Phoenician political independence vanished completely. Yet their culture, language, religion, and economic practices survived through adaptation rather than resistance. The decline of Phoenician civilization was thus not a cultural extinction, but a political absorption. Their cities continued to thrive under Roman rule. Their language evolved into Punic and remained spoken well into late antiquity. Their symbols, gods, and traditions persisted across North Africa. The Phoenicians declined as an independent political force, but their influence did not die. It changed form, merging into new worlds while continuing to shape future civilizations. When historians speak of decline, they often imagine disappearance. But the Phoenicians did not vanish after Alexander's conquests or Rome's rise. Instead, they underwent a profound transformation, adapting to new cultural, political, and economic realities. Under Hellenistic and Roman rule, Phoenician identity evolved, merged with new influences, and re-emerged in new forms. Their resilience is one of the most striking aspects of their history. After Alexander the Great's conquest, the Levant fell under the control of the Hellenistic kingdoms, especially the Ptolemies and Seleucids. These rulers brought Greek language, art, and civic institutions into Phoenician cities. Rather than resisting this influence, the Phoenicians blended it with their own culture. Greek-style theaters, gymnasia, and public buildings appeared alongside Phoenician temples and markets. Greek became widely spoken in cities like Sidon and Byblos. Yet Phoenician inscriptions continued well into the Hellenistic period. This coexistence shows that Phoenician identity was not erased, it adapted. Phoenician religious traditions also merged with Greek beliefs. Melkart became closely associated with Heracles. Astarte blended with Aphrodite. Eshmun became linked to Asclepios. These syncretic forms allowed Phoenician gods to survive under new names and attributes. The blending of religious practices also helped integrate Phoenician cities into a wider Mediterranean spiritual network without abandoning their core traditions. Under Hellenistic rule, Phoenician craftsmanship and trade continued to flourish. Merchants used Greek currency but maintained traditional trade routes. Glassware, purple textiles, carved ivories, and metal goods produced in Phoenician workshops continued to travel across the Mediterranean. This economic continuity ensured that even as political structures changed, the cultural heart of Phoenician society remained strong. The next great transformation came under the Roman Empire. Rome's destruction of Carthage ended Phoenician political independence in the West. But ironically, Rome and Carthage became one of the wealthiest and most important cities of the empire, rebuilt by Julius Caesar and later expanded by Augustus. Rome and Carthage grew into a major center of agriculture, trade, and culture. Its population soared. Its theaters and public buildings rivaled those of Rome itself, and its intellectual life flourished. Philosophers, writers, and orators emerged from Punic and Roman Carthaginian backgrounds. The Punic language survived much longer than many realize. It was spoken across North Africa until at least the 5th century CE and possibly into the early Islamic period. Church fathers like Augustine of Hippo recorded that rural populations in North Africa continued to use Punic, calling it the language of their ancestors. Phoenician influence can be seen in Roman religion, agriculture, and politics. Many Roman farming techniques, especially those described in the writings of Mago the Carthaginian, were borrowed directly from Punic expertise. Roman navigation, harbor construction, and textile industries also drew inspiration from Phoenician traditions. Even in the Levant, Phoenician cities prospered under Rome. Tyre became a center of Roman law. Sidon thrived as a producer of glass and luxury goods. Byblos remained a religious and cultural hub. The Roman Empire valued these cities for their economic productivity and did not attempt to suppress their cultural heritage. The transformation of Phoenician civilization under Hellenistic and Roman rule illustrates one of history's greatest truths. Identity is not destroyed by change. It is reshaped through adaptation. The Phoenicians survived not by resisting every wave of conquest, but by riding those waves into new eras, carrying forward traditions that remained alive long after their political independence had faded. Their legacy endured in language, religion, art, trade, agriculture, and cultural memory, woven quietly into the wider tapestry of the ancient Mediterranean. The most surprising chapter of Phoenician history is not its rise or its political downfall, but its survival. Although Phoenician city-states and Carthage fell to foreign empires, their culture did not disappear. Instead, it endured quietly through everyday practices, local traditions, rural populations, religious customs, and linguistic persistence. This silent survival is one of the most profound legacies of the Phoenicians. The Punic language, a Western dialect of Phoenician, continued to be spoken in North Africa for centuries after Carthage's destruction. Roman authors such as Augustine of Hippo described Punic-speaking farmers and villagers in the 4th and 5th century CE. Augustine even noted that some Punic words still existed in his time, and that the rural population preserved Punic idioms and expressions. This linguistic endurance shows that Phoenician identity persisted in everyday life long after Carthage's political collapse. Some scholars believe Punic may have survived into the 7th or 8th century CE, overlapping with the early Islamic period. Elements of Punic vocabulary likely blended into the Berber languages of North Africa, contributing linguistic influence that remains detectable today. This blending mirrors the Phoenician pattern of cultural adaptation, never rigid, always interconnected. Religious traditions also survived. Many Phoenician and Punic symbols, such as the palm tree, crescent moon, tannet symbol, and rosette, continued in North African art throughout late antiquity. Sacred sites originally dedicated to Phoenician gods were repurposed by Romans and later by Christians, but local populations often retained elements of pre-Roman ritual practices. Even early Christian communities in North Africa absorbed aspects of Punic religious life, adapting festivals and agricultural celebrations into Christian liturgical calendars. In the Levant, Phoenician traditions also endured. Cities like Tyre and Sidon remained major centers of trade and craftsmanship under the Byzantine Empire. Their citizens continued to speak local Semitic dialects that preserved elements of Phoenician speech. The continuity of maritime culture in Lebanon and the Syrian coast shows persistent roots tracing back to ancient Phoenician society. Carthage itself experienced multiple rebirths. After being destroyed by Rome, it was rebuilt as a Roman colony and flourished for centuries. Later, it became a center of Christian scholarship. The story of Carthage reveals a pattern of continuous cultural layering. Phoenician, Roman, Christian, and eventually Islamic influences all coexisting on the same ancient foundations. Each layer carried traces of the one before it. Phoenician economic practices also left a long-lasting imprint. Techniques of shipbuilding, navigation, agriculture, and textile production were absorbed by Greek and Roman society. Carthaginian agricultural manuals influenced Roman farming literature. Their harbor designs inspired Roman architectural engineering. Their alphabet served as the ancestor of Greek, Latin, and many modern scripts. Even today, the cultural memory of the Phoenicians remains alive in places like Lebanon, Tunisia, and parts of Spain. Lebanese coastal culture still reflects ancient seafaring traditions, artisanal craftsmanship, and maritime commerce reminiscent of Phoenician life. In Tunisia, descendants of Punic communities remained identifiable for centuries, and Carthaginian heritage forms a proud part of national identity. Spanish cities, such as Carthage, maintain archaeological sites that reveal ancient Phoenician foundations. The Phoenicians survived not as conquerors, but as connectors. Their civilization persisted through adaptation, cultural blending, and the quiet resilience of everyday people who passed down language, stories, skills, and symbols through generations. Their legacy lives not in monumental ruins or imperial annals, but in the cultural DNA of the Mediterranean world. The silent survival of the Phoenicians is a testament to the power of cultural endurance, a reminder that even when nations fall, civilizations can continue to live through the people who carry their memory forward. The Phoenicians were not merely skilled sailors. They were master shipbuilders whose engineering innovations transformed the ancient maritime world. Long before Greek triremes or Roman quinquiremes became symbols of naval might, Phoenician craftsmen had already laid the technological foundations for advanced seafaring. Their shipyards, spread across cities like Byblos, Sidon, and especially Tyre, produced vessels that combined durability, speed, balance, and cargo capacity in ways never before seen in the Mediterranean. To understand the reach of Phoenician expansion, one must begin with the ships that carried them across seas, around coastlines, and into the distant Atlantic. Phoenician shipbuilding was intimately connected to the natural environment. Lebanon's cedar forests, famed throughout the ancient world, provided the ideal material for crafting ships. Cedar wood was strong yet flexible, resistant to rot, and capable of withstanding saltwater exposure. The aromatic oils within cedar made the wood resistant to insects and decay, allowing Phoenician ships to last for decades. This longevity was essential for merchant vessels that traveled thousands of miles, visiting ports from Egypt to Gibraltar and beyond. The Phoenicians developed a range of ship types tailored for specialized roles. Their earliest vessels were simple plank boats designed for coastal travel. Over time, they refined hull shapes to increase stability and speed. The famous Phoenician merchant ship, often depicted on Egyptian reliefs, had a rounded hull for maximum cargo space. These vessels used a single square sail supported by a sturdy mast. They relied heavily on wind currents, but were also equipped with oars for maneuvering in calm waters or tight harbors. Their most iconic creation was the bireme, a warship with 2 rows of oars on each side. This design increased propulsion power and maneuverability, enabling naval engagements that relied on speed, formation precision, and ramming tactics. The front of the ship featured a bronze ram designed to pierce enemy hulls. The bireme became the precursor to later multi-tiered warships, including the trireme, which the Greeks eventually perfected. Yet the fundamental engineering principles behind these ships, symmetry, proportionality, hull hydrodynamics were Phoenician innovations. Phoenician ships featured multiple engineering advancements rarely seen elsewhere at the time. They used mortise and tenon joints to fasten planks together securely, creating strong hulls able to endure long-distance voyages. They applied waterproofing using resin, pitch, and oil mixtures, making ships more resistant to weathering. They designed auxiliary steering systems using twin stern paddles, giving captains greater control over direction. Some vessels included raised decks, allowing Marines or cargo supervisors to oversee operations without obstructing rowers. Phoenician shipyards operated like sophisticated production centers. Craftsmen specialized in cutting timber, shaping planks, weaving ropes, casting metal components, and assembling vessels using standardized measurements. They followed inherited traditions passed down for generations, ensuring that each ship met strict functional and aesthetic standards. This meticulous approach produced fleets that were both visually striking and technologically superior. Carthage, inheriting Eastern Phoenician expertise, developed even more advanced shipbuilding techniques. The Carthaginian circular harbor, known as the Kothon, featured covered docks that protected ships and allowed rapid mobilization. Every warship had an assigned compartment stocked with oars, sails, tools, and provisions. This level of organization demonstrated how shipbuilding evolved from a craft into a highly coordinated military-industrial enterprise. Phoenician shipbuilding genius was not only technical, it was visionary. Their vessels allowed them to push past known horizons, explore new worlds, and forge connections across continents. Their ships were their identity, symbols of resilience, craftsmanship, independence, and ambition. Without their maritime technology, Phoenician civilization could never have risen to the heights recognized by history. Their ships were their legacy, floating monuments of ingenuity that carried the spirit of a people determined to conquer the sea not through war, but through mastery of innovation. Phoenician navigators were among the most skilled seafarers the world has ever known. Long before modern compasses, maps, or GPS technology, they relied on intimate knowledge of nature, winds, tides, stars, birds, currents, and cloud formations to guide their voyages. Their mastery of navigation made them the first truly global mariners of the ancient Mediterranean, capable of reaching distant shores with confidence and precision. Central to Phoenician navigation was their understanding of celestial patterns. They recognized that Polaris, the North Star, provided a fixed point in the night sky, making it a reliable guide for determining latitude and maintaining course. Greek writers later credited the Phoenicians with pioneering the use of Polaris for navigation, a method so effective that it became the foundation of maritime travel for thousands of years. Phoenician sailors tracked constellations like Ursa Major and Cassiopeia, using their seasonal positions to estimate time, direction, and location. Wind patterns were equally important. The Phoenicians learned the rhythms of the Mediterranean's seasonal winds, the Etesian winds, the Levant, the Tramontane, and others. They timed their voyages according to predictable seasonal patterns, avoiding dangerous winter storms and capitalizing on favorable breezes during spring and summer. Their specialized knowledge of regional microclimates allowed them to navigate areas notorious for sudden weather changes, including the Aegean and the Western Mediterranean. Ocean currents formed another key element of their navigational toolkit. The Phoenicians were among the first to systematically observe currents, such as the clockwise Atlantic circulation near the Strait of Gibraltar. These observations enabled them to travel safely around the Iberian Peninsula and even explore the Atlantic coastlines of Europe and Africa. Herodotus recorded that Phoenician explorers, commissioned by the Egyptian pharaoh Necho II, may have circumnavigated Africa centuries before the Portuguese. These voyages likely relied on an understanding of wind systems, currents, and coastal landmarks. Phoenician sailors also observed marine life as navigational aids. The presence of dolphins often indicated nearby land or shoals. Bird migration patterns helped sailors determine directional changes or proximity to coastline habitats. The color and temperature of the water could indicate depth, reefs, or approaching river mouths. This ecological knowledge was passed down orally from generation to generation, forming a body of maritime wisdom unmatched in the ancient world. Their navigational techniques were supported by advanced nautical instruments, simple yet effective tools such as sounding weights to measure depth, marked ropes, wooden floats, and reference logs recording distances traveled. They used solar shadows to gauge time and rudimentary water clocks for estimating travel duration. These tools, though basic compared to modern technology, enabled accurate navigation across expansive maritime networks. Phoenician explorers were not confined to the Mediterranean. They ventured beyond the Pillars of Hercules, Strait of Gibraltar, into the Atlantic, reaching the coasts of Morocco, Portugal, Spain, and possibly even the British Isles in search of tin. Some ancient writers claimed they sailed as far as the Canary Islands and Madeira. Their willingness to explore unknown waters marked them as pioneers of maritime exploration long before later civilizations attempted similar feats. What distinguished Phoenician navigation was not just technique, but philosophy. They approached the sea with respect, discipline, and curiosity. They recognized that mastery of the ocean required humility as much as courage. Their knowledge was practical, adaptive, and deeply rooted in observation, an intellectual tradition that valued experience over theory. Through their navigational genius, the Phoenicians connected civilizations, transported goods and ideas, and expanded the boundaries of the known world. Their mastery of the sea was not merely a technological achievement. It was a cultural triumph, a testament to the ingenuity of a people whose lives were inseparable from the ocean that shaped their destiny. Phoenician maritime supremacy was not built on ships alone. It required an extensive network of ports, harbors, warehouses, and logistical systems that allowed them to sustain long-distance trade efficiently. These infrastructures formed the skeleton of Phoenician economic power, enabling goods to move from forests to shipyards, from workshops to markets, and from distant colonies back to the homeland. Understanding their maritime trade system reveals the level of organization, planning, and engineering that underpinned their prosperity. Phoenician ports were marvels of ancient urban design. Much like modern logistical hubs, they featured designated areas for cargo loading, storage, repairs, shipbuilding, and administrative activities. Harbors were carefully chosen based on natural geography. Deep waters, protective cliffs, river outlets, or island shelters. Cities like Sidon and Tyre were built around dual harbor systems, separating military and commercial functions. This allowed for efficient movement of goods while keeping warships ready for rapid deployment. What distinguished Phoenician navigation was not just technique, but philosophy. They approached the sea with respect, discipline, and curiosity. They recognized that mastery of the ocean required humility as much as courage. Their knowledge was practical, adaptive, and deeply rooted in observation, an intellectual tradition that valued experience over theory. Through their navigational genius, the Phoenicians connected civilizations, transported goods and ideas, and expanded the boundaries of the known world. Their mastery of the sea was not merely a technological achievement. It was a cultural triumph, a testament to the ingenuity of a people whose lives were inseparable from the ocean that shaped their destiny. Phoenician maritime supremacy was not built on ships alone. It required an extensive network of ports, harbors, warehouses, and logistical systems that allowed them to sustain long-distance trade efficiently. These infrastructures formed the skeleton of Phoenician economic power, enabling goods to move from forests to shipyards, from workshops to markets, and from distant colonies back to the homeland. Understanding their maritime trade system reveals the level of organization, planning, and engineering that underpinned their prosperity. Phoenician ports were marvels of ancient urban design. Much like modern logistical hubs, they featured designated areas for cargo loading, storage, repairs, shipbuilding, and administrative activities. Harbors were carefully chosen based on natural geography. Deep waters, protective cliffs, river outlets, or island shelters. Cities like Sidon and Tyre were built around dual harbor systems, separating military and commercial functions. This allowed for efficient movement of goods while keeping warships ready for rapid deployment. The most impressive example of Phoenician harbor engineering was Carthage's Kothon, the circular military harbor connected to a rectangular commercial harbor. The Kothon had berths for over 200 warships, each housed in a protected dock with storage rooms for equipment, food, weapons, and sails. A central command tower enabled naval oversight, communications, and coordination. The design allowed rapid mobilization. Carthaginian fleets could be deployed within hours. This level of maritime infrastructure was unmatched in the ancient world. Warehouses played an essential role in managing the flow of goods. These structures stored textiles, metals, wine, oil, timber, incense, spices, pottery, and luxury items. Phoenician merchants operated with a detailed understanding of supply chains, ensuring goods arrived fresh, unspoiled, and ready for sale. Storage facilities were often built with ventilation systems, drainage channels, and raised floors to protect items from moisture and pests. Some warehouses doubled as workshops where raw materials were processed before shipment. Phoenician ports also featured administrative buildings where officials monitored trade, collected taxes, regulated weights and measures, and recorded transactions using the Phoenician alphabet. This bureaucratic oversight ensured fair commerce and protected the interests of both local merchants and foreign partners. Many ports issued standardized weights, seals, and currencies, further evidence of a sophisticated commercial system. Maritime infrastructure extended beyond city walls. The Phoenicians built way stations along long voyages, strategically placed coastal settlements used for refueling, repairing ships, and storing emergency supplies. From Cyprus to Malta, from Sardinia to the Moroccan coast, these way stations served as vital lifelines for sailors facing storms, shortages, or damaged vessels. The logistical system was also supported by commercial legal codes and business practices that regulated contracts, partnerships, shipping agreements, and dispute resolution. Phoenician merchants developed early forms of insurance to protect against losses from shipwrecks or piracy. These legal frameworks allowed complex, multinational trade networks to function smoothly. Finally, Phoenician maritime infrastructure shaped urban culture. Markets near harbors bustled with activity. Inns accommodated visiting traders. Taverns fed sailors. Workshops produced goods for export. Harbors were not merely economic centers. They were cultural crossroads where languages mixed, myths were shared, and artistic ideas traveled. The movement of goods was inseparable from the movement of culture. Through this logistical sophistication, the Phoenicians built what scholars often call the first maritime commercial empire. a network not based on military conquest, but on infrastructure, engineering, and organization. Their ports and harbors were the beating hearts of their civilization, enabling them to navigate the ancient world not as conquerors, but as connectors. Among all Phoenician industries, none became as legendary or as profitable as the production of Tyrian purple dye, the most coveted luxury color of the ancient world. This dye, extracted from the glands of the murex sea snail, represented extraordinary economic wealth, political symbolism, and cultural prestige. It became so synonymous with Phoenician excellence that ancient writers often referred to the Phoenicians simply as the Purple People. The industry's impact extended far beyond fashion. It shaped trade networks, influenced royal iconography, and helped finance the expansion of Phoenician colonies across the Mediterranean. The origins of the Tyrian purple industry are rooted in practical experimentation. Phoenician fishermen observed that when certain species of murex snails, Murex brandaris, Murex trunculus, and Thaissimystoma, were crushed or injured, they released a milky secretion that turned purple when exposed to sunlight. Early craftsmen discovered that by extracting and processing the gland responsible for this secretion, they could produce a dye of unmatched vibrancy and permanence. Unlike plant-based dyes that faded over time, Tyrian purple remained bright even after years of wear and washing. This durability contributed to its high value. But the dye's brilliance came at a tremendous cost. Each snail produced only a tiny drop of usable pigment. To dye a single cloak, thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, of murex snails were required. This meant that the dye was not only rare, but labor-intensive. Workers collected snails in massive quantities from coastal waters around Phoenician cities, such as Tyre, Sidon, and Arwad. They cracked open shells, removed glands, fermented the secretion in large vats, and boiled it under precise conditions. The process produced an awful smell. Ancient writers noted that the odor of dye factories could be detected from miles away. For this reason, dye workshops were usually located outside city walls or along remote shorelines. The production process required patience and specialization. Dye masters monitored the dye's color transformation, from white to yellow to green to blue to deep purple, over several days. Any error in timing, temperature, or exposure ruined the batch. This expertise was passed down through generations, often within tightly guarded guilds or family traditions. The complexity of the craft elevated dye masters to a respected class within Phoenician society, comparable to master artisans or elite merchants. The value of Tyrian purple grew rapidly as demand spread. Royals, aristocrats, priests, and wealthy merchants across Egypt, Israel, Greece, Anatolia, and Rome sought purple garments as symbols of power. Purple garments became a kind of political currency, emblems of kingship, divinity, and high office. In Greece, purple cloaks signified noble status. In Rome, the color became so tightly controlled that laws restricted its use to emperors and high-ranking officials. Wearing Tyrian purple signaled authority, wealth, and divine favor. This global demand ensured extraordinary profit. A single gram of Tyrian purple dye was worth more than its weight in gold. Phoenician cities funded fleets, constructed harbors, financed colonies like Carthage, and maintained political independence, at least temporarily, using the wealth generated from this industry. The dye became one of the most successful trade commodities of the ancient Mediterranean. But economic success came with environmental consequences. The huge quantities of discarded murex shells created massive heaps, some of which survive today as archaeological mounds near ancient dye factories. These shell piles are vital clues to Phoenician industrial activity, offering insight into the scale of production. Entire coastlines were transformed by centuries of murex harvesting, demonstrating the environmental footprint of ancient industry long before the concept of ecology existed. The symbolism of Tyrian purple endured long after Phoenician political dominance faded. Byzantine emperors still used purple as the color of royalty. The phrase "born in the purple" originated from imperial traditions connected to Phoenician dye. Even in modern cultures, purple retains associations with dignity, leadership, and luxury, echoes of a Phoenician legacy that shaped civilizations for thousands of years. In essence, the purple dye industry was not merely an economic enterprise. It was a reflection of Phoenician innovation, craftsmanship, and mastery of both natural resources and international markets. Through this industry, the Phoenicians colored the ancient world with a shade that symbolized their brilliance, resilience, and lasting influence. While Tyrian purple made the Phoenicians famous, it was only one part of a vast industrial economy powered by expert craftsmanship and natural resources. The Phoenicians excelled in metalwork, glassmaking, carpentry-based engineering, stone carving, and textile production. These industries were the backbone of their commercial empire. They supplied goods to foreign markets, supported urban populations, financed shipbuilding, and allowed Phoenician merchants to dominate Mediterranean trade for centuries. Metalwork was one of the oldest and most advanced Phoenician industries. From the early Bronze Age onward, Phoenician craftsmen produced high-quality tools, weapons, jewelry, and ceremonial artifacts using copper, bronze, silver, and gold. Their mastery of smelting, alloying, casting, and engraving made their metal goods prized across Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Aegean. They specialized in manufacturing intricate bowls, ritual vessels, bracelets, hairpins, rings, and inlaid plaques. Many of these objects combined Eastern and Western artistic styles, reflecting Phoenician cosmopolitan culture. Phoenician metalworkers also supplied raw materials to foreign powers. Cyprus, under strong Phoenician influence, was a major source of copper. Shiploads of copper ingots, often shaped like oxhide molds, left Cypriot ports for Greece, Anatolia, and Egypt. This metal formed the foundation of tools and weapons throughout the Mediterranean. Another industry that elevated Phoenician economic prestige was glassmaking. The Phoenicians, particularly those in Sidon, were among the earliest and greatest innovators in glass production. They created beads, miniature vessels, inlays, ornaments, and decorative pieces that dazzled ancient customers. Although full-scale glass blowing emerged later in the Hellenistic era, early Phoenician techniques laid the groundwork for this revolution. They crafted patterned glass, core-formed vessels, mosaic glass, and translucent beads in vibrant colors. Phoenician glassware spread across the Mediterranean, often discovered in graves, temples, and royal treasuries far from their homeland. These beautiful objects became tokens of status and symbols of Phoenician artistic superiority. Their glassmaking knowledge continued to influence later cultures, including the Romans, who developed large-scale glass-blowing industries based on earlier Phoenician principles. The timber trade was equally essential. Lebanon's cedars, pines, and oaks were renowned for durability, fragrance, and waterproof qualities. Phoenician carpenters used these woods not only for shipbuilding, but also for temple construction, palace interiors, furniture, and monumental architecture. Egypt, which lacked native cedar forests, relied heavily on Phoenician timber imports. Pharaohs often sent expeditions to Byblos to secure wood for sacred boats, tombs, and royal residences. Timber also became a diplomatic gift. deepening political ties between the Phoenicians and neighboring powers. Stone carving formed another important industry. Although Phoenician cities were not known for monumental architecture like Egypt, they produced exquisite carved sarcophagi, steles, sculpture fragments, and architectural ornaments. These works often featured hybrid artistic themes. Greek-style human figures combined with Egyptian lotus motifs, Assyrian winged creatures, or Canaanite religious symbols. The blending reflected the multicultural nature of Phoenician society. Textile production played a vital role in everyday life and export economies. In addition to purple dyeing, Phoenicians produced linen, wool garments, embroidered fabrics, and patterned cloth. Their textiles were known for durability and beauty, often featuring geometric designs, floral motifs, and elaborate borders. Foreign elites valued Phoenician clothing as symbols of wealth and sophistication. Phoenician craftsmanship extended to everyday tools and household items as well. Their pottery, although less artistically ambitious than Greek ceramics, was sturdy, functional, and widely traded. Their lamps, combs, utensils, and containers filled homes across multiple civilizations. Their woodworking skills produced everything from fine furniture to ship components. Their carpenters were often employed by foreign kings to build temples, ships, and royal residences. All of these industries worked together to create a diversified economy. The Phoenicians were not dependent on a single resource. They combined natural materials, artistic talent, and engineering knowledge to create products that dominated international markets. Their craftsmanship became a brand, a reputation that guaranteed quality and beauty. Through their industrial genius, the Phoenicians transformed themselves from coastal city-states into the economic engine of the ancient Mediterranean. At the heart of Phoenician civilization was a sophisticated economic system that connected continents, cultures, and kingdoms through an intricate web of trade routes and market exchanges. Unlike the land-based empires of the Near East, the Phoenicians built a commercial empire without armies or territorial conquests. Their power rested not in political domination, but in economic integration, uniting distant regions through commerce, diplomacy, and the movement of goods. This system was the foundation of their wealth, influence, and longevity. The Phoenician trade network stretched across the Mediterranean and beyond. In the east, their routes connected the Levant with Egypt, Cyprus, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia. In the west, they reached Sicily, Sardinia, Malta, Ibiza, southern Iberia, and North Africa. Farther still, they explored the Atlantic coasts of Africa and Europe. This commercial web created one of the earliest globalized economic environments in human history. Phoenician traders became experts in both export and import strategies. They exported goods such as purple textiles, glassware, metalwork, pottery, timber, perfumes, agricultural products, and luxury items. They imported copper from Cyprus, silver from Spain, tin from Britain, gold and ivory from Africa, papyrus and wheat from Egypt, and exotic good from Arabia and Mesopotamia. Their ships carried commodities, ideas, technologies, and artistic styles across thousands of miles. Their economic strategy relied on multi-layer markets. Local markets in Phoenician cities served everyday needs, while large port markets connected international merchants. Seasonal fairs, shipping schedules, and religious festivals created predictable cycles of trade. Phoenician traders operated with a mix of flexibility and long-term planning. They learned foreign languages, cultural customs, weights and measures, and diplomatic etiquette to negotiate across diverse cultures. The Phoenicians were among the earliest to use standardized weights, measures, and contracts. Their economic agreements often involved multiple partners: ship owners, merchants, sailors, financiers, and craftsmen. These partnerships created shared risks and shared profits, spreading economic responsibility across entire communities. It was a forerunner of later commercial corporations. Phoenician currency evolved over centuries. Early transactions used barter and weighed silver, but eventually city-states like Tyre and Sidon minted their own coins. Phoenician coins were decorated with symbols such as ships, palm trees, Melkart, or the city's crest. These coins became widely accepted across the Mediterranean, demonstrating the trust foreign merchants placed in Phoenician economic systems. The establishment of colonies played a crucial role in maintaining trade networks. Colonies like Carthage, Gator, Cadiz, Motia, and Lixus serve as resupply stations, distribution centers, and local markets. From these hubs, Phoenicians could access raw materials, negotiate with indigenous leaders, and expand trade routes further inland. Colonies ensured the continuity of commercial routes, even when political turmoil affected the homeland. One of the most remarkable features of Phoenician economic strategy was their ability to operate even under foreign domination. When Assyria, Babylon, Persia, or Greece controlled the Levant, Phoenician merchants simply adapted. They continued trading, sometimes even serving imperial missions. The economy never collapsed because it was decentralized, flexible, and supported by international demand. Phoenician business practices became models for later civilizations. Greek, Roman, and even medieval merchants adopted elements of their accounting, shipping agreements, and logistic systems. Their commercial networks served as the blueprint for future maritime economies, from Rome's merchant fleets to Venice's trading republics. In essence, the Phoenicians created a commercial empire without borders, enforced not by soldiers, but by sailors, craftsmen, and merchants. Their economy was a masterpiece of coordination, innovation, and global connection. Through their trade networks, they shaped the ancient world's economic landscape and left a legacy that continues to influence commerce, logistics, and global trade today. The Phoenician religious system was a complex, multi-layered worldview rooted in ancient Canaanite traditions, yet enriched by centuries of cultural contact across the Mediterranean. Their pantheon was not rigid or static, but dynamic, evolving through syncretism with Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Greek, and local North African deities. The Phoenicians believed in a universe governed by divine forces that oversaw nature, fertility, storms, healing, craftsmanship, and the cosmic cycles that governed life and death. This spiritual framework shaped not only religious rituals, but also daily habits, political authority, and maritime practices. At the center of the Phoenician pantheon stood El, the ancient high god associated with creation, wisdom, fatherhood, and the cosmic order. In earlier periods, El was revered as the wise patriarch who governed the divine assembly. However, as Phoenician society evolved, El became less prominent in daily worship, replaced by more active and dynamic deities who represented specific aspects of life. Still, his presence lingered in mythological memories and ceremonial traditions. One of the most important gods in Phoenician religion was Baal, a storm and fertility deity who controlled rain, thunder, lightning, and agricultural cycles. Baal was not a single deity, but a title meaning Lord, associated with regional variations such as Baal-Hadad or Baal-Shamon, Lord of the Heavens. Phoenician sailors prayed to Baal for favorable winds, safe voyages, and protection against storms. Farmers offered sacrifices to ensure rainfall and abundant harvests. Baal's mythology often portrayed him battling the forces of chaos, symbolizing humanity's struggle to impose order on the natural world. Another foundational deity was Astarte, Ashtart/Astareth, the great goddess of love, fertility, sexuality, war, and celestial power. Her influence stretched from Mesopotamia to the Aegean, where she became associated with goddesses such as Ishtar, Aphrodite, and Anat. Astarte embodied duality, nurturing life yet wielding destructive force. She was worshipped through offerings, music, dance, and ceremonial rites that symbolized renewal, passion, and creation. Her temples were among the most significant spiritual centers in Phoenician cities, drawing both locals and foreigners. Perhaps the most iconic Phoenician deity was Melkart, patron god of Tyre. Melkart represented kingship, maritime power, and the life-death rebirth cycle. Every year, Tyrians celebrated a festival reenacting Melkart's resurrection, symbolizing the renewal of nature and the regeneration of community strength. Melkart was also associated with foreign deities, identified with Heracles in Greek culture and with other heroic figures in Mediterranean mythology. His cult played a central role in Phoenician expansion. Many colonies, including Gator, Cadiz, built temples dedicated to him. In Carthage, two deities rose to preeminence, Baal-Hamon and Tanit. Baal-Hamon was a god of sky, storms, and fertility, often depicted with ram's horns or enthroned amid symbols of celestial power. His role in Carthaginian religion reflected the agricultural importance of North Africa, where fertility rites ensured the prosperity of farmlands and orchards. Tanit, the great goddess of Carthage, represented motherhood, protection, and cosmic harmony. Her symbol, a triangle topped with a circle and flanked by raised arms, became an emblem of divine femininity across the Punic world. Tanit's cult blended Canaanite, Berber, and Mediterranean elements, illustrating the dynamic nature of Phoenician religious evolution. Other significant deities included Eshmun, the god of healing, Resheph, the god of plague and protection, Dagon, associated with grain and agriculture, Yam, the sea god, Mot, the god of death and drought, and Shapash, the sun goddess who illuminated the world cycles. Each god played a unique role within a vast cosmic framework. Rituals, myths, and seasonal festivals honored these divine beings, ensuring harmony between humans and the universe. Unlike monotheistic systems, the Phoenician pantheon operated on principles of balance, specialization, and interdependence. Each god governed a particular domain, and people invoked them as needed. This decentralized spiritual view mirrored Phoenician political organization. City-states with unique identities, yet united by shared culture. Just as Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos had their own rulers and traditions, they also maintained distinct patron gods while remaining part of a larger religious heritage. The Phoenician pantheon was not simply a collection of deities. It was a worldview shaped by the sea, trade, and movement. Their gods traveled with them, adapted to new lands, merged with local traditions, and evolved into new forms. Through this flexible spiritual system, the Phoenicians created a religious identity that survived conquest, migration, and cultural transformation for centuries. Phoenician religion was deeply woven into the fabric of daily life, shaping community identity, social roles, and urban architecture. Temples, priests, and ritual specialists played crucial roles in maintaining spiritual order and mediating the relationship between humans and divine forces. Rituals were not reserved for dramatic ceremonies. They guided everything from childbirth and marriage to voyages, trade agreements, and seasonal harvests. The Phoenicians believed that harmony between the divine and human realms was essential for prosperity, protection, and societal balance. Phoenician temples were architectural focal points in every major city. Built on elevated platforms or prominent locations, they symbolize the presence of the gods within urban space. Temples varied in size and complexity depending on the deity, the city, and available resources. Some featured monumental staircases, stone altars, carved reliefs, and courtyard for public gatherings. Others were smaller, housing sacred objects, votive offerings, and statues of deities. In Tyre, the Temple of Melkart was renowned for its grandeur and for hosting the annual Resurrection Festival. In Sidon, temples dedicated to Astarte and Eshmun attracted pilgrims from across the Levant. Temples functioned not only as religious spaces, but also as economic, political, and social centers. They collected offerings, managed land, stored wealth, and even participated in trade. Priests acted as community leaders, record keepers, healers, and advisors. They supervised rituals, interpreted omens, and guided families through rites of passage. Priesthoods were often hereditary, passing knowledge from one generation to the next to preserve continuity of sacred traditions. Phoenician rituals were diverse and symbolically rich. Daily offerings of incense, wine, oil, and grain were common. Priests performed purification rites to cleanse individuals or spaces from impurity. Festivals celebrated seasonal transitions, celestial events, victories, or divine myths. Music, dance, feasting, and processions accompanied major ceremonies. Ritual boats, chariots, and animal sacrifices played symbolic roles in expressing devotion and invoking divine favor. Childbirth and family rituals involved prayers to Tanit, Astarte, or Eshmun for fertility, protection, and healing. Brides and grooms offered sacrifices before marriage, seeking blessings for prosperity and harmony. Funerary practices varied, but often included offerings, libations, and burial goods meant to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. Maritime rituals held special importance. Before embarking on voyages, sailors offered sacrifices to Baal Shamum, Melkart, or Yam. Ship captains performed libations at harbors, dedicating voyages to the gods. If storms struck at sea, sailors invoked divine assistance, sometimes casting offerings into the water to appease sea spirits. The sea was both a lifeline and a danger, so rituals served as psychological and spiritual anchors. Healing rituals were central to the cult of Eshmun, the god of medicine. Temples dedicated to Eshmun included healing pools, sacred gardens, and ceremonial spaces where priests performed cures using herbs, prayers, and rituals. Patients left votive offerings, miniature body parts made of clay or stone, to request healing for specific ailments. Carthaginian ritual life shared many similarities with Eastern Phoenician practices, but also developed distinct local characteristics. The Tophet of Carthage, a sacred precinct containing urns, steels, and altars, has been extensively debated. Some scholars interpret the Tophet as a burial ground for infants and young children, possibly associated with rituals of dedication to Baal Hammon and Tanit. Others argue that it was a cemetery for children who died naturally. Regardless of interpretation, the site reveals the central role of children, family, and divine protection in Punic religious life. Temples also served as cultural hubs. They preserved artistic traditions, commissioned sculptures, sponsored festivals, and maintained libraries of inscriptions. Religious specialists included musicians, dancers, artisans, and scribes who contributed to ceremonial life. Public festivals strengthened communal identity and connected people to their shared heritage. Phoenician ritual life emphasized continuity, tradition, and the renewal of cosmic harmony. Through an intricate system of ceremonies, offerings, and priestly duties, the Phoenicians maintained a spiritual world that supported their economic and social ambitions. Their temples were not simply places of worship. They were the beating hearts of their cities, preserving cultural memory and shaping the rhythms of daily life. Phoenician mythology was a rich tapestry woven from ancient Canaanite traditions, maritime experiences, and centuries of cultural exchange. Although many of their myths have been lost due to limited surviving texts, fragments preserved in inscriptions, classical writings, and archaeological discoveries allow us to reconstruct their spiritual imagination. Their myths were not isolated stories. They formed a worldview that explained natural forces, shaped moral values, and provided meaning to life's mysteries. For a people defined by the sea, exploration, and trade, these myths reflected their relationship with both the natural world and the unknown. Central to Phoenician mythological tradition was the theme of cosmic cycles, life, death, and rebirth. This theme was especially evident in the stories of Melkart, who symbolized regeneration. His annual festival reenacted his return from the underworld, representing renewal of fertility, maritime strength, and the continuity of life. This myth supported not only religious beliefs, but also political legitimacy, reinforcing the idea that kings ruled with divine favor. The Phoenicians also inherited older Canaanite myths involving cosmic battles between order and chaos. Baal's struggle against Yam, the sea, Ormot, death, echoed natural cycles of storms, droughts, and seasonal changes. These myths resonated deeply with a seafaring society that faced unpredictable elements during long voyages. Sailors interpreted storms as manifestations of divine conflict and prayed for Baal's victory. The mythological battle between Baal and Yam, for example, symbolized the human struggle to survive against the unpredictable forces of nature. Astarte, the great goddess, embodied themes of love, war, fertility, and celestial power. Myths associated her with the morning and evening star, reflecting the dual nature of beauty and destruction. Her influence extended across the Mediterranean, blending with Greek and Roman mythologies. In Cyprus, she became Aphrodite. In Carthage, she merged with Tanit. This adaptability reflects the fluid movement of Phoenician culture across continents. Phoenician symbolism was equally powerful. The palm tree represented life and renewal. The solar disk symbolized divine fire, kingship, and celestial guidance. The Tanit symbol, with its geometric form, signified protection, motherhood, and cosmic harmony. The ship symbolized destiny, exploration, and the journey between life and the afterlife. The rosette, a stylized flower, appeared in art, jewelry, and architecture as a symbol of beauty, continuity, and divine presence. Sacred landscapes played an important role in Phoenician spiritual life. Mountains, springs, groves, and coastal cliffs were often considered dwellings of divine beings. Temples were built in places where nature's presence felt powerful, on high hills, near water sources, or along promontories overlooking the sea. These sacred locations reflected a worldview in which the natural and divine realms intertwined. The Phoenicians possessed a nuanced understanding of the afterlife. Burial practices varied across regions and periods, but common features included offerings, pottery, jewelry, amulets, and inscriptions. These items reflected the belief that life continued in another realm, and that the dead required protection, nourishment, and symbolic objects. Stone sarcophagi carved in Egyptian, Greek, or Phoenician styles indicate cultural blending in funerary art. Some tombs included lamps, suggesting light for the journey into the afterlife. Others featured carved symbols invoking divine guardianship. Punic burials in North Africa revealed a mix of cremation and inhumation practices, reflecting evolving beliefs under Greek, Roman, and Berber influence. Inscriptions sometimes requested blessings or peace for the deceased, emphasizing a desire for spiritual continuity. Myths and symbolism also shaped ethical values. Courage, loyalty, respect for the gods, and protection of family were central virtues. Because the Phoenicians traveled widely, their spiritual worldview emphasized adaptability, humility before nature, and gratitude for safe voyages. Their myths offered comfort during storms, meaning in suffering, and hope in renewal. Ultimately, Phoenician mythology and symbolism formed a spiritual language that transcended borders. Their gods traveled with them, evolved in new lands, and endured through centuries of change. This spiritual imagination sustained a civilization defined by movement, holding together families, colonies, and communities scattered across the Mediterranean world. Although the Phoenicians are often remembered primarily as traders, explorers, and master artisans, their history also contains a significant military dimension, one that evolved in response to political pressure, colonial expansion, and a growing need to defend far-flung maritime networks. The Phoenicians were not an aggressively expansionist people, nor did they build land-based empires like Assyria or Rome. Instead, their military forces emerged organically from necessity, to protect their cities from invaders, to defend merchant fleets from piracy, and to safeguard colonies and trade routes scattered across thousands of miles. Early Phoenician warfare grew from the defense needs of independent city-states such as Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and Arwad. These cities were prosperous but vulnerable. Situated along the coast, they faced threats from inland powers: Egyptians, Canaanites, Philistines, Israelites, Assyrians, Babylonians, and Persians. To protect themselves, Phoenician cities relied on fortified walls, local militias, elite warrior units, and naval patrols. Archaeological remains reveal powerful double-wall fortifications, watchtowers, gates, and harbors designed for rapid mobilization. These defenses allowed cities like Tyre to survive sieges that would have destroyed less prepared settlements. Phoenician armies early on were relatively small, typically composed of citizen soldiers who trained part-time while working as merchants, artisans, or farmers. Their strength came not from numbers, but from specialization. Phoenician warriors were skilled archers, slingers, spearmen, and shock infantry. They were known for using bronze and iron weapons crafted by their own metalworkers. Phoenician shields, helmets, and armor often blended designs learned from Egyptian and Mesopotamian influences, further enhanced by local craftsmanship. But the true power of Phoenician warfare lay not on land. It lay at sea. Their greatest innovation was the fusion of military tactics with maritime technology, which transformed the Phoenician navy into the backbone of their defense strategy. Their earliest warships were modified merchant vessels equipped with reinforced bows for ramming. Over time, the Phoenicians developed specialized naval warships, such as biremes and triremes, capable of high speed, coordinated rowing, and devastating impact. These vessels became essential for repelling hostile fleets, escorting merchant ships, and asserting control over sea lanes. Phoenician city-states often cooperated in times of crisis. When threatened by large empires, alliances formed quickly. Even rival cities like Tyre and Sidon united against common enemies. This cooperative spirit allowed the Phoenicians to endure long periods of imperial pressure. Their ability to adapt, to shift strategies, form alliances, and prioritize survival over confrontation was one of their greatest military strengths. A turning point came when Phoenician colonies in the Western Mediterranean began to grow in power, particularly Carthage, which would later develop one of the most formidable military systems of the ancient world. In the early stages, Carthage relied heavily on naval strategy similar to its eastern ancestors. But as it expanded territorially, it developed land armies, colonial garrisons, and a sophisticated network of mercenary forces. These developments gradually reshaped Phoenician military identity from a defensive maritime culture into a more complex imperial structure. Yet even before Carthage's rise, Phoenician warfare had already evolved. Tyre's defiance during the 13-year Babylonian siege and later during Alexander the Great's conquest showcased the resilience, ingenuity, and engineering sophistication of their military architecture. Their ability to withstand such prolonged assaults demonstrated that Phoenician warfare was far more advanced than many ancient writers acknowledged. Thus, the evolution of Phoenician military power reveals a civilization that, while prioritizing commerce over conquest, never neglected self-defense. Their approach to warfare was pragmatic, adaptive, and intimately connected to their maritime identity. They did not seek to dominate through violence. They sought to survive, protect, and preserve their way of life. And in doing so, they laid the foundation for Carthage's military revolution, a new era that would challenge some of the greatest powers in history. As Phoenician power shifted from the Levant to the Western Mediterranean, Carthage emerged as the dominant force, politically, economically, and militarily. Unlike the eastern city-states, which focused primarily on trade and local defense, Carthage built a structured, multi-layered military designed to protect its vast colonial network and compete directly with Greek and Roman powers. Carthage became one of the most formidable military states of antiquity, relying on a combination of naval supremacy, tactical innovation, and a unique mercenary-based land army. The most distinctive aspect of Carthaginian warfare was its reliance on mercenaries. Carthage did not maintain large numbers of native citizen soldiers, except for small elite units. Instead, it recruited warriors from across Africa, Iberia, Sardinia, Sicily, Gaul, and even Greece. This multicultural army was diverse in tactics, fighting styles, and weaponry. Iberian fighters excelled in swordsmanship and swift charges. Numidian cavalrymen, renowned for their speed and maneuverability, were among the finest light horsemen in the world. Libyan infantry provided disciplined spear formations, while Balearic slingers delivered devastating long-range missile fire. Gauls contributed fierce shock infantry, and Greek mercenaries added tactical expertise. This diversity gave Carthage remarkable battlefield flexibility. Generals could deploy a mix of units specialized in skirmishing, cavalry maneuvers, shock assaults, or defensive formations. However, it also created challenges. Different languages, weapons, and loyalties had to be managed. Carthaginian commanders developed strong logistical systems, multilingual officer structures, and rigid hierarchy to maintain cohesion. Carthaginian generals, especially the Barcid family, were among the most brilliant tacticians in history. Hannibal Barca remains the most famous, but his father Hamilcar and brother Hasdrubal were also exceptional leaders. Their use of terrain, ambush tactics, psychological warfare, and rapid maneuvering stunned opponents. Hannibal's victories at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae are still studied in military academies today. His ability to coordinate cavalry, infantry, and mercenaries across diverse environments showcase Carthage's advanced military culture. Yet Carthage's greatest strength remained its navy, inherited from its Phoenician ancestors. Carthaginian shipbuilders refined the bireme and trireme designs, creating swift, durable warships equipped with rams, catapults, and deck troops. Their naval bases, especially the Kothon in Carthage, allowed rapid deployment and maintenance of large fleets. Carthaginian naval crews were highly trained, often recruited from Punic families with long maritime tradition. Their skill was unmatched in the Western Mediterranean, enabling Carthage to dominate sea routes for centuries. Naval battles relied heavily on maneuvering and ramming, but Carthage also employed boarding tactics, missile volleys, and deceptive formations. Their fleets protected merchant convoys, escorted colonial supply ships, blockaded enemy ports, and engaged Greek or Roman navies when necessary. For much of Carthage's history, no power could seriously challenge its naval supremacy until Rome adapted Phoenician ship designs and began constructing its own powerful fleets. Carthage's military system was innovative in another way. It operated like a professional corporation. Funding came from trade profits, colonial taxation, mining industries, and agricultural estates. Military expenses were meticulously calculated, and mercenaries were paid generously, ensuring loyalty and performance. Carthage's political system, dominated by wealthy merchant families, supported military expansion when it benefited economic interests. However, dependence on mercenaries also created risks. After the First Punic War, unpaid mercenary forces rebelled, nearly destroying the state during the infamous Mercenary War. Carthage regained control through brutal campaigns, but the event revealed a weakness that Rome later exploited. Still, this reliance on hired soldiers allowed Carthage to maintain vast armies far larger than its own population could supply. The Carthaginian military represented the transformation of Phoenician tradition into a powerful imperial machine. It combined naval heritage, multicultural armies, strategic intelligence, and economic strength into a unified system. Carthage demonstrated that a commercial empire could also become a military superpower, challenging even Rome for supremacy of the Mediterranean world. The Punic Wars were among the most dramatic and consequential conflicts in world history. They pitted two rising powers, Carthage, the heir to Phoenician maritime brilliance, and Rome, an aggressive land-based republic, against one another in a struggle that would determine the future of the Mediterranean. The war spanned more than a century and transformed both civilizations. For Carthage, they marked the rise of legendary heroes, unprecedented military achievements, and ultimately catastrophic destruction. For Rome, they marked the beginning of imperial expansion that would shape Europe, Africa, and the Near East for centuries. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE, began over control of Sicily. Carthage possessed strong naval forces and well-defended colonies, while Rome had virtually no experience at sea. But Rome quickly adapted, building fleets modeled on captured Carthaginian ships. Their invention of the corvus boarding device allowed Roman infantry tactics to be used in naval battles, turning engagements into close-quarters combat where they held the advantage. Despite early Carthaginian successes, Rome ultimately prevailed through relentless shipbuilding, persistence after losses, and strategic control of Sicily's inland regions. Carthage lost Sicily and faced severe war indemnities. This defeat pushed Carthage to expand into Iberia, seeking new resources to rebuild its strength. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BCE, was the most famous, largely because of Hannibal Barca, one of history's greatest military commanders. Hannibal initiated the war by attacking Roman allies in Iberia. Instead of defending Carthage's holdings directly, he conceived a daring strategy. invade Italy itself. His crossing of the Alps, accompanied by war elephants and a multicultural army, became legendary. In Italy, he won a series of stunning victories: Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae, where he annihilated a Roman army through a perfectly executed double envelopment maneuver. Rome suffered staggering losses, and many of its allies defected. Yet Hannibal lacked the siege resources needed to attack Rome directly, and the Carthaginian government failed to send consistent reinforcements. Meanwhile, Rome shifted strategy, avoiding direct confrontation, cutting off supply lines, and launching counter-invasions in Spain and North Africa. Under Scipio Africanus, Rome seized Carthage's Spanish territories and then invaded its homeland. Hannibal was recalled to defend Carthage and was defeated at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. Carthage lost its overseas empire, much of its army, and its ability to wage future wars without Roman permission. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BCE, was the final act. Although Carthage had honored peace terms for decades and rebuilt prosperity through trade and agriculture, Rome feared its resurgence. Influential Roman senators, especially Cato the Elder, repeatedly insisted Carthage must be destroyed. When Carthage fought back against Numidian encroachment without Roman approval, the excuse for war arrived. Rome besieged Carthage for 3 years. The defenders, citizens, slaves, and warriors fought with extraordinary determination, turning streets into battlegrounds and houses into fortresses. But Rome's superior resources and siege engines eventually overwhelmed the city. In 146 BCE, Carthage fell. Its walls were breached, its buildings burned, its population killed or enslaved. The city was razed to the ground, although later rebuilt by Rome. The Punic state never recovered. This destruction marked the definitive end of Phoenician political independence, both east and west. Yet the Punic Wars did more than eliminate a rival. They reshaped the Mediterranean world. Rome adopted elements of Phoenician navigation, commerce, agriculture, and even religion. Hannibal's tactics influenced military history for millennia, and Carthage's tragic fall became a symbol of resistance, resilience, and the fragility of empires. The Punic Wars represent the final chapter of Phoenician geopolitical power, but not the end of their story. Their culture, language, and influence endured long after Carthage's fall, carried forward through North African traditions, Roman Carthage, and the enduring legacy of a civilization that refused to be erased. Among all the achievements of the Phoenicians, none transformed human history more profoundly than the alphabet. Long before the rise of classical Greek literature or Roman law, the Phoenicians developed a writing system so efficient, so elegant, and so adaptable that it reshaped communication across continents. While earlier civilizations like Egypt and Mesopotamia had complex systems of writing, hieroglyphics and cuneiform, that required years of training and hundreds of symbols, the Phoenician alphabet reduced the written code to a streamlined set of characters representing sounds rather than ideas or syllables. This monumental innovation democratized literacy, accelerated trade, expanded knowledge networks, and laid the foundation for nearly every alphabet used today. The origins of the Phoenician alphabet can be traced to earlier Canaanite and Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions. These early scripts emerged from interactions between Semitic-speaking workers and Egyptian hieroglyphics. Over time, these symbols were simplified and adapted into a coherent system. By around 1050 BCE, the Phoenicians had standardized a 22-letter consonantal script known as an al-Shari, a writing system that recorded consonants but left vowels implied by the reader. This system was remarkably efficient for Semitic languages, which naturally placed grammatical emphasis on consonantal roots. The structure of the Phoenician alphabet was simple yet powerful. Each letter represented a basic consonant sound. The shapes of the letters were originally pictographic, depicting objects whose initial sounds reflected the letter's phonetic value. For example, Aleph, A, originally represented an ox head. Bet, B, represented a house. Gimel, G, represented a camel. Lamed, L, represented a goad or shepherd's staff. Over time, these pictorial forms evolved into more abstract shapes, making them easier to write quickly with ink on papyrus or with styluses on clay. The alphabet's portability and simplicity were perfectly suited to the Phoenicians' needs as merchants. It allowed them to record transactions, maintain inventories, draft trade agreements, label goods, and communicate across multilingual environments. Unlike cuneiform or hieroglyphics, which required trained scribes, the Phoenician alphabet could be learned by ordinary traders, sailors, and craftsmen. This accessibility accelerated its spread along Phoenician trade routes. As Phoenician merchants established colonies across the Mediterranean, their writing system traveled with them. In Cyprus, it influenced local scripts. In North Africa, it evolved into Punic and Neo-Punic writing used for centuries. But the most significant transformation occurred when Greek traders encountered the script. Realizing its potential, the Greeks borrowed the Phoenician alphabet around the 8th century BCE. They made one crucial innovation. They added vowels, creating the first fully phonetic alphabet. The Greek alphabet then spread to the Etruscans of Italy, who passed it to the Romans. The Latin alphabet, which emerged from this chain of adaptation, eventually became the writing system of Western civilization. Modern European alphabets, English, French, Spanish, German, and many others, can trace their origins directly back to the Phoenician script. Even beyond Europe, the alphabet influenced Middle Eastern systems like Aramaic and Hebrew, which share structural similarities with Phoenician writing. Arabic writing, derived from Nabatean Aramaic, ultimately owes part of its ancestry to the same ancient script. Thus, the Phoenician alphabet is the ancestral root of countless writing systems, an intellectual revolution that enabled literature, science, history, law, religion, and philosophy to flourish in the centuries that followed. Without Phoenician innovation, the written world would look radically different. The alphabet's true legacy lies not only in its symbols, but in its philosophy. The idea that writing could be simple, accessible, and universal. It opened the door for literacy to move beyond palace walls and temple scribes. It laid the groundwork for democratic communication, enabling ideas to spread faster than ever before. It shaped the minds of the Greeks, the Romans, the early Christians, and the world that followed. In a sense, the alphabet was the Phoenicians' greatest gift to humanity, an invisible heritage that continues to live in every book, every sign, every screen, and every human thought translated into written form. Through their alphabet, the Phoenicians became immortal, their influence embedded in the very way the world communicates. The Phoenicians were more than traders. They were cultural translators, carriers of ideas, artisans of identity, and catalysts of exchange across the Mediterranean. Their ships did not simply transport goods. They transported beliefs, symbols, technologies, and artistic styles. As the first true maritime networkers of the ancient world, the Phoenicians created a cultural web that linked Egypt, Greece, Anatolia, Cyprus, Mesopotamia, North Africa, and Iberia. Through this web, civilizations influenced one another, merging languages, adopting rituals, imitating art, and absorbing technical knowledge. The result was a shared Mediterranean culture with Phoenician fingerprints scattered across every region. One of the most important aspects of this cultural transmission was artistic exchange. Phoenician craftsmen incorporated Egyptian lotus flowers, Mesopotamian winged deities, Cypriot pottery forms, and Aegean geometric patterns into their work. These hybrid styles then traveled to distant colonies and foreign marketplaces, where local artisans imitated or adapted them. Greek art, for example, absorbed Phoenician motifs such as rosettes, sphinxes, griffins, and palm trees. Early Greek pottery reflects unmistakable Levantine influence. Even Greek jewelry and metalwork borrowed techniques developed in Phoenician workshops. Phoenician religious concepts traveled as well. The Greek goddess Aphrodite likely originated from Phoenician Astarte, worshipped at Paphos in Cyprus long before Hellenic settlers arrived. Melkart, the Tyrian god, became identified with Heracles. Phoenician storm god imagery influenced Greek interpretations of Zeus. Carthaginian practices shaped Berber religious traditions in North Africa, blending Punic symbolism with local beliefs. Even Jewish temple architecture reflects Phoenician engineering and aesthetic contributions. King Solomon's temple was built with the assistance of Phoenician craftsmen from Tyre. Technological transmission also played a major role. Phoenicians were experts in shipbuilding, metallurgy, glassmaking, textiles, and agricultural techniques. Their knowledge passed to Greeks, Etruscans, Iberians, and Romans. The Romans adopted Phoenician metal mining techniques when exploiting Spanish silver mines. Phoenician glassmaking traditions directly influenced Roman glass industries, which later spread across Europe and the Middle East. Their harbor engineering inspired Roman port construction, particularly the use of breakwaters and stone block foundations. Carthage's agricultural expertise, preserved in the works of the Carthaginian writer Mago, became a cornerstone of Roman farming. The Romans translated Mago's treatise and used his advice on grafting, irrigation, vineyard cultivation, and orchard management throughout their empire. Thus, Phoenician agricultural science shaped the food production systems of Europe for centuries. Cultural transmission also occurred through language. The Phoenicians were multilingual by necessity, speaking Phoenician while learning Greek, Egyptian, Aramaic, Berber, and local dialects in Iberia. Their linguistic flexibility facilitated communication between civilizations that otherwise shared little common ground. This ability to mediate between cultures gave them extraordinary cultural influence. They became interpreters not just of language, but of ideas, explaining foreign customs, negotiating agreements, and creating bridges between distant societies. Even social customs spread through Phoenician influence. Greek symposium culture, Mediterranean banquet traditions, and aspects of Hellenistic luxury can be traced back to Phoenician and Near Eastern practices of dining, drinking, reclining, and celebrating with music and dancers. The coastline of the Mediterranean became a zone of shared identity precisely because the Phoenicians moved so freely across its waters. Perhaps the most profound cultural legacy of the Phoenicians was the idea of openness, the belief that cultures could mix, adapt, and enrich one another. In a world often defined by rigid boundaries and tribal identities, the Phoenicians served as proof that mobility, exchange, and hybridity were not threats, but strengths. They fostered a Mediterranean civilization that was not fragmented by geography, but united by exchange. The Phoenicians did not impose their culture. They shared it, carried it, blended it, and allowed it to evolve. Their legacy is the story of a connected world long before the modern concept of globalization. Through their artistry, technologies, and religious influences, the Phoenicians shaped the cultural DNA of the Mediterranean in ways that continue to resonate through art, language, and identity today. Though the Phoenicians vanished from political history after the Roman destruction of Carthage, their cultural echoes never fully disappeared. Over the centuries, their memory survived in legends, linguistic traces, ancient texts, and the landscapes of the Mediterranean. Yet it was only in the last 200 years, through archaeology, linguistic research, and historical rediscovery, that the Phoenicians returned to public awareness. Today, they play a powerful role in national identities, academic study, and popular imagination, reclaiming their position as one of the great civilizations of the ancient world. Much of the early modern perception of the Phoenicians came through their enemies, the Greeks and Romans, who often portrayed them as cunning traders or mysterious outsiders. Carthage, in particular, suffered from Roman propaganda, which demonized its culture to justify conquest. Figures like Dido, Elissa, were romanticized in literature, while Hannibal was both admired and feared. These portrayals colored Western attitudes for centuries, obscuring the true complexity of Phoenician civilization. Archaeology changed everything. Beginning in the 19th century, excavations in Lebanon, Tunisia, Cyprus, and Spain uncovered a wealth of artifacts. Temples, sarcophagi, steels, necklaces, amphorae, mosaics, shipwrecks, and inscriptions. The rediscovery of Byblos, with its ancient temples and royal tombs, revealed deep connections to Egypt. Excavations at Tyre uncovered harbors, industrial zones, and monumental public buildings. Sidon yielded remarkable sarcophagi featuring Egyptian and Greek artistic influences. In Carthage, massive excavations revealed Punic neighborhoods, harbor complexes, sacred precincts, and domestic spaces that brought the city back to life. These discoveries transformed the Phoenicians from obscure historical footnotes into vibrant participants in ancient history. Scholars began reconstructing their language, translating inscriptions, and analyzing trade routes. They discovered how Phoenician writing evolved into Greek, how Punic evolved into North African dialects, and how Phoenician religion shaped later traditions. Even today, new findings continue to reshape our understanding of their culture, revealing shipwrecks, industrial sites, and previously unknown colonies. Modern nations have also embraced Phoenician heritage as part of their identity. In Lebanon, the Phoenicians are celebrated as ancestors of the modern Lebanese people. Lebanese coastal culture, seafaring traditions, artisanal crafts, and mercantile identity reflects Phoenician continuity. National symbols, literature, and education emphasize the Phoenicians as founders of Lebanon's maritime spirit. In Tunisia, Carthaginian heritage is equally prominent. Carthage is a symbol of national pride, and Hannibal is viewed as a heroic figure. The ruins of Carthage attract global tourism and feature prominently in cultural life. In Spain, cities like Cadiz, ancient Gator, celebrate their Phoenician origins. In Malta, Sardinia, and Morocco, local histories integrate Phoenician and Punic archaeology into cultural narratives. These regions showcase temples, pottery, coins, and other relics that reflect centuries of Phoenician presence. Beyond national boundaries, the Phoenicians play a major role in global historical discourse. They are frequently cited as the first great maritime civilization, pioneers of capitalism, early developers of globalization, inventors of the alphabet, and masters of cultural exchange. Museums around the world curate exhibitions dedicated to Phoenician art, navigation, and colonial networks, highlighting their contributions to world history. The Phoenicians also thrive in literature and popular culture. Novels, films, and documentaries explore their myths, voyages, and conflicts. Hannibal's campaigns remain legendary, inspiring endless military studies and fictional retellings. The story of Queen Dido continues to appear in romantic and tragic narratives. Phoenician explorers are sometimes credited with reaching distant lands, inspiring speculative histories and adventurous theories. Modern scholarship has also re-examined the Phoenicians' identity, seeking to understand how they viewed themselves. Rather than a unified empire, they were a network of culturally linked city-states and colonies. This decentralized identity makes them a fascinating subject in studies of globalization, decentralized governance, and maritime networks. Today, the Phoenicians stand not as a lost civilization, but as a rediscovered one whose contributions to writing, art, commerce, navigation, and cultural fusion shaped the foundations of the modern world. Their legacy is revived through archaeology, embraced by nations, and celebrated by scholars. In recovering their story, humanity reclaims a key chapter of its past, a chapter written not on land, but across the rolling waves of the Mediterranean. When most people think of the Phoenicians, they imagine sailors, merchants, and artisans navigating the Mediterranean with remarkable confidence. But beneath these professions was a deeper intellectual tradition, one built on observation, mathematics, astronomy, metallurgy, craftsmanship, and practical problem solving. The Phoenicians left no surviving philosophical treatises like the Greeks, nor scientific encyclopedias like later Islamic scholars. Instead, their knowledge was embedded in action, encoded in working systems, and transmitted through craft, trade, and navigation. Their intellectual contributions shaped ancient science, influenced surrounding cultures, and laid conceptual groundwork for disciplines that blossomed in later civilizations. A cornerstone of Phoenician intellectual life was practical mathematics, necessary for navigation, shipbuilding, architecture, and trade. Navigators calculated distances using rope measurements, astronomical observations, and an intuitive understanding of geometry. Shipbuilders used proportional systems to design hulls, masts, and sails that balanced speed with stability. Merchants employed arithmetic to determine profits, manage inventory, measure goods, convert currencies, and maintain long-distance records of transactions. These mathematical practices were based on inherited Near Eastern systems, but refined to suit the complex world of maritime commerce. The Phoenicians were also innovators in astronomy, though their knowledge was rooted in observational technique rather than theoretical models. They tracked the movements of Polaris and major constellations, allowing them to develop some of the earliest maritime navigation systems. This expertise impressed the Greeks so much that they credited the Phoenicians with pioneering celestial navigation. Without such innovations, long-distance maritime expansion, from Cyprus to Spain, from Lebanon to Morocco, would have been far riskier. Their star charts, seasonal tracking, and wind calendars helped define early nautical science. In the realm of medicine, Phoenician traditions centered around healing deities like Eshmun and involved herbal treatments, ritual purification, and early forms of clinical observation. Carthage, in particular, developed medical practices that blended indigenous North African knowledge with inherited Canaanite traditions. While little direct medical literature survives, references in Roman texts indicate that Punic healers were respected for their botanical knowledge, especially regarding tropical herbs, aromatic resins, and treatments for wounds or infections. Their intellectual contributions extended to engineering. The construction of harbors like the Tyrian double port or Carthage's circular naval base required sophisticated planning. Engineers understood water flow, sediment management, stone cutting, and geometric layout. They created artificial islands, reinforced seawalls, and built ship sheds with precision. These engineering feats influenced Greek and Roman harbor construction centuries later. Roman engineers studied Phoenician methods when designing breakwaters, dry docks, and naval facilities across their empire. One of the most underrated areas of Phoenician intellectual achievement was agricultural science, especially in Carthage. The agricultural treatise of Mago, often called the father of Punic agriculture, was so respected that after the destruction of Carthage, the Roman Senate ordered it translated into Latin. Mago's work included detailed instructions on irrigation, grafting, livestock management, orchard planting, vineyard cultivation, and soil conservation. Roman agriculture absorbed these ideas, which later influenced medieval European farming techniques. Through agriculture, the Phoenicians shaped not just the Mediterranean economy, but also its long-term ecological practices. Phoenician education was rooted in apprenticeship and family tradition. Children of merchants learned accounting, weights, measures, and foreign languages. Children of craftsmen trained in workshops, mastering techniques through years of hands-on practice. Shipbuilders, navigators, dye masters, glassmakers, metalworkers, and carpenters all passed down knowledge across generations, forming tightly bonded intellectual communities. This educational model emphasized mastery through experience, making Phoenician knowledge deeply resilient and adaptive. The Phoenicians also contributed to the intellectual world by serving as transmitters of knowledge. They transported ideas between civilizations just as they transported goods. Egyptian religious concepts reached Greece through Phoenician intermediaries. Metalwork techniques from Anatolia spread to Europe. Babylonian astronomical knowledge traveled westward aboard Phoenician ships. Even myths, languages, and artistic motifs were carried between cultures by Phoenician traders, scribes, and envoys. In essence, Phoenician intellectual contributions were practical, adaptive, and interwoven with daily life. They did not construct massive philosophical systems, but they created the tools, methods, and networks that made later intellectual revolutions possible. Their knowledge was a living tradition, shaped by wind, sea, and opportunity, a legacy of ingenuity that enriched the ancient world and continues to influence modern disciplines. The political systems of the Phoenicians offer a fascinating contrast to the centralized empires that dominated much of the ancient Near East. Instead of building a unified state governed by a single monarch, the Phoenicians developed a decentralized network of autonomous city-states: Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, Arwid, and others, each with its own government, patron deity, economy, and political traditions. This political fragmentation was not a weakness, but a form of resilience. When one city fell, the other survived. When empires rose and imposed tribute, the cities adapted. When trade routes shifted, new colonies emerged across the sea. Phoenician governance was highly pragmatic. Most cities were ruled by kings, but these monarchs often governed alongside councils of elders, merchant assemblies, and religious authorities. This balance of power prevented tyranny and ensured that commercial interests remained central to political decision-making. Wealthy merchant families held significant influence, shaping foreign policy, sponsoring fleets, and funding temple construction. The king represented unity and diplomacy, while merchant elites represented economic power and stability. Diplomacy was one of the Phoenicians' greatest strengths. They excelled at forming treaties, negotiating trade agreements, and balancing alliances between rival powers. Their survival between Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome required extraordinary diplomatic skill. Instead of challenging empires militarily, they offered naval expertise, luxury goods, tribute, and strategic cooperation. This ability to survive through diplomacy rather than conquest became a model studied by later Mediterranean states. The Phoenicians also pioneered multicultural governance through their colonies. In Cyprus, Sardinia, Sicily, and Iberia, they adapted to local customs while introducing their own institutions. Colonies like Gator, Cadiz, and Mokia blended Phoenician and indigenous traditions into hybrid forms of administration. Carthage, the greatest Phoenician colony, expanded this model, creating a republic ruled by elected officials called Sephites, a council of elders, and assemblies representing leading families. This political structure was admired even by Greek philosophers. Aristotle compared Carthage's constitution favorably to those of Sparta and Crete. Carthage also managed a complex imperial system. It controlled territory in North Africa, Spain, Sardinia, and Sicily through negotiated alliances, strategic marriages, local governors, tribute agreements, and military garrisons. Rather than impose cultural assimilation, Carthage allowed local languages and customs to persist. This multicultural political flexibility contributed to the longevity of Punic influence across the Mediterranean. Another political innovation was the Phoenician use of maritime federation. While not a formal empire, their cities maintained shared religious festivals, trade networks, and diplomatic customs. The cult of Melkart, for instance, united Tyre with its western colonies. Religious and cultural ties effectively created a political web without centralized control, a model similar to later Greek city-state federations. The Phoenicians also influenced later ideas about commercial governance. Their combination of merchant councils, royal authority, and decentralized administration became a prototype for later trading powers, such as the Carthaginian Republic, the Greek maritime leagues, and even the medieval Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa. These societies, too, thrived through naval strength, merchant leadership, and free market networks. In the long term, Phoenician political structures shaped Mediterranean concepts of autonomy, civic identity, and maritime cooperation. Their decentralized approach demonstrated that political unity did not require a single ruler or rigid empire. Instead, they achieved collective prosperity through flexibility, collaboration, and adaptation. Their political legacy challenges modern assumptions that centralization is necessary for power. The Phoenicians succeeded by embracing diversity, encouraging local independence, and building alliances that transcended borders. Through diplomacy, multicultural governance, merchant influence, and colonial networks, the Phoenicians helped define what a maritime political system could be. Their political DNA reappears throughout history, in republics, trading leagues, federations, and coastal powers that drew inspiration from these ancient innovators of governance. As the story of the Phoenicians reaches its conclusion, one truth becomes unmistakably clear. Although their cities were destroyed, their political structures absorbed, and their names eventually lost to time, the spirit of the Phoenicians never died. It lives on not merely in archaeological remains or academic texts, but in the very fabric of modern civilization. In the alphabets we write, the ships we build, the maps we follow, the trade systems we depend on, and the multicultural world we inhabit today. The first enduring value of Phoenician civilization is connectivity. The Phoenicians believed that the world was richer when cultures met, ideas exchanged, and borders dissolved. They did not fear foreign customs. They embraced them. They carried Egyptian motifs to Iberia, Greek symbols to Lebanon, and Near Eastern technology to North Africa. They lived in a world defined not by isolation, but by movement. Today's global economy, international travel, and intercultural dialogue reflect the same principles that guided Phoenician sailors thousands of years ago. The second enduring value is adaptability. Throughout their history, the Phoenicians faced enormous pressures: Assyrian armies, Babylonian sieges, Persian demands, Greek expansion, and Roman conquest. Yet they survived longer than many centralized empires. Their decentralized political structure allowed them to adapt without collapsing. When cities fell, colonies rose. When a homeland weakened, Carthage ascended. When Carthage fell, Punic culture survived in North Africa for centuries. Their story illustrates that flexibility, not rigidity, is the key to longevity. This lesson resonates today in societies that must adapt to changing environments, technologies, and geopolitical landscapes. The third enduring value is innovation rooted in practicality. The Phoenicians invented the alphabet not to create literature, but to make trade easier. They developed advanced shipbuilding not for conquest, but for navigation. They refined glassmaking, metallurgy, dyes, and agriculture not as artistic luxuries, but as economic necessities. Their genius lay in solving problems: how to navigate by stars, how to preserve timber, how to engineer harbors, how to record contracts efficiently. Modern engineering, maritime science, logistics, and business practices continue to reflect this pragmatic creativity. A fourth value is cultural resilience. Although their political power ended with the fall of Carthage, the Phoenicians' cultural influence endured across centuries. Punic language survived into late antiquity and possibly into early Islamic times. Phoenician symbols remained in North African art. Ritual traditions persisted in rural communities. Even today, in Lebanon, Tunisia, Malta, Spain, and Morocco, local identities reflect traces of Phoenician heritage. This endurance testifies to a civilization whose impact was so deeply woven into daily life that it could not be erased by conquest. The Phoenicians also inspire a fifth value: courage in exploration. They crossed seas others feared, mapped coastlines others ignored, and dared to sail into the unknown. Their voyages to the Atlantic, their rumored circumnavigation of Africa, and their exploration of distant lands symbolize a human impulse that continues today: curiosity, adventure, and the desire to understand the world beyond the horizon. Every modern explorer, scientist, astronaut, and innovator carries a spark of the Phoenician spirit. Finally, the enduring legacy of the Phoenicians lies in their ability to unite without conquering. They built networks instead of armies, partnerships instead of empires, and harbors instead of fortresses. They showed that greatness does not require domination. It can emerge from cooperation, commerce, and cultural exchange. In a world still divided by conflict, the Phoenicians offer a different vision of power, one based on collaboration, adaptability, and shared prosperity. Today, the Phoenicians live on in the alphabets we write, the words we speak, the technologies we use, and the global networks that define our world. Their story is not simply an ancient tale. It is a mirror reflecting what humanity can achieve through creativity, connection, and courage. They were a people of the sea, of movement, of exchange. And though their sails no longer cut across the Mediterranean, the winds that once carried their ships now carry their legacy across time, across cultures, and across the very structure of civilization itself. And that brings us to the end of our journey through the vast, powerful, and unforgettable world of the Phoenicians, a civilization that lived on the sea, thrived on innovation, and left behind a legacy woven into the fabric of our modern lives. Today, you learned how the Phoenicians connected the ancient world through trade and diplomacy, invented the alphabet that became the foundation of modern writing, master navigation, stars, and shipbuilding, built Carthage, one of history's greatest cities, fought legendary battles against Rome, created technologies, industries, and cultural networks that still influence us today, survived not through conquest, but through creativity, adaptability, and collaboration. The moral of their story is clear. True power doesn't always come from armies or empires. Sometimes it comes from ideas, from connection, from courage, from the ability to adapt, innovate, and reach beyond the horizon. The Phoenicians remind us that even a small people, with the sea as their only ally, can shape the destiny of the world. If you enjoyed this epic journey, make sure to stay tuned to History Teller YT. This channel is dedicated to bringing forgotten civilizations back to life, telling stories that textbooks overlook, and showing you the ancient world like you've never seen it before. More adventures, more mysteries, and more powerful histories are waiting just beyond the next wave. Thank you for watching, and until we meet again, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep sailing toward knowledge.